This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing today? I got an interesting conversation yesterday, and it was a couple of guys that didn't know the price of gold. And I was like, yeah, it's breaking records. You know, like it's extremely high. Well, all-time high. I don't know why I go extremely high. And he's like, oh, it's funny. I just never pay attention to it. I'm like, oh, well, you know, in fairness, I hadn't paid a ton of attention till a few years ago, and that's because of a company like Silver Gold Bull coming into onto the podcast, into the realm of what we've been doing here. We've been talking a lot of different things. One of the things coming up that Silver Gold Bull's helping bring to Calgary is the Cornerstone Forum, and one of the things we're going to be talking about there is sound money. We got Vince Lanchi and Ben Perrin talking Bitcoin, Tom Luongo, and Tom Bodrovics from Palisades Gold Radio. Like, we're going to be talking about sound money and discussing some of the things that are going on right now when it comes to dollars, cents, investing, and just, you know, like what to do in this crazy world where it just seems like every day we start to maybe pick ourselves out of this, and then something new happens. You're like, maybe not. And, you know, gold sitting at all-time high, folks. Silver just crushing it too. So if you're like, maybe I knew that. Maybe I can't afford that. Maybe I can afford that. Maybe I want, you know, text or email Grahame down in the show notes for details. They got tons of different ways to get you involved in it. And they got feature silver deals exclusively just for you, the SMP listeners. So if you haven't started a conversation with Grahame yet, there's no pressure. Just text him. And start asking questions, start building a relationship. From everyone that has, they've really enjoyed talking with Grahame. So that's what I would say. It was an interesting conversation. And with Silver Gold Bull being one of the title sponsors of the show, and then of bringing the Cornerstone Forum, where we're going to actually talk sound money, go down in the show notes and text or email Grahame for details in regards to silver and gold. Profit River. You know, one of the other things we got talking about at this is funny was you know, guns and gun grabs because, you know, the Liberals, did it squeak out again that they're going to try and do a gun grab? And, you know, that makes life a little interesting. So if you got your pal, you know, you should be reaching out to Joel. He is the new contact at Profit River. You can reach out at snp@profitriver.com. You know, if you've been holding off on buying anything firearm related, I don't know, until the Liberals are just out, I probably wouldn't. I just probably wouldn't. And plus the added bonus, it's the start of a new month, which means if you make a purchase, you're entered in for a $100 gift card to the store. And of course, when it comes to Profit River, they specialize in importing firearms from the United States, but that's not all. They got consignment guns, so people put their guns up there. You can go buy used weapons. You can find a ton of stuff on their website, profitriver.com. And they are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories serving all of Canada. So it doesn't matter where you're listening to this, folks. And when it comes to firearms, if you go on to Profit River and reference SNP when you're making your purchase, you're going to get entered into some deals. RecTech Power Products. For over 20 years, they've been committed to power sports. And, you know, they got, I'm just going to pull it up here. I had it literally sitting beside me. They got some benefits for commercial or agriculture. So basically, if you're a business owner, when it comes to quads and speaking and side-by-side, speaking directly to Can-Ams, they have a bunch of things that they're trying to offer to businesses and commercial. And that is extended, I said like businesses and commercial. I mean, commercial and agriculture, and to me, it just means business owners, but that's probably not the way they would say it. Regardless, it's Can-Ams, quads and side-by-sides. They got extended warranty all the way up to a $3,500 rebate. So if you've been thinking about getting in on a side-by-side or a quad, there is some things going on right now that you might want to reach out to RecTech and find more out about. Of course, you can go to rectechpowerproducts.com. They're on the west side of Lloydminster. You can stop in Monday through Saturday. They're open. And just tell Ryan that I sent you. Any purchases out there, make sure to reference SNP as well. PlanetCom. When you're busy growing a business and running it and trying to stay on top of the ever-changing world of information technology, it can be overwhelming, to say the least. That's an understatement. I mean, it's an insane world right now when it comes to tech. Well, that's where PlanetCom comes in. They can take care of you, leaving you to do your thing while they do theirs. For over 22 years, PlanetCom has been here to boost the productivity for you and proactively manage every aspect of your IT infrastructure, both in-house and in the cloud. This ensures you're not tangled up in technology to get anything done. So when it comes to websites and when it comes to, I don't even know the words, the Google, this is why I butcher this. This is why you go to PlanetCom. So planetcom.ca is where you're going to find these folks. Carl has good conservative businessman. Can I say that? I think I can. He's a pretty sweet dude, and they do some pretty cool stuff when it comes to websites and all the security and tech side of it when you're dealing with the online world. If you're interested in that, planetcom.ca is where you head. Substack, it's free to subscribe to. It's funny, this past Sunday, folks, with everything going on with the injection of truth and on and on and on, there wasn't a whole lot. So if you're like, wow, I signed up, and it's like, it's fair. It's fair. It happens every once in a while, but typically 5 p.m. Sundays, you're getting the week in review and everything else. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to do all the things. Make sure to retweet. Do it, because it helps get the message out. And, yeah. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. He is a freelance consultant who has made significant contributions to urban planning, policy development, and community engagement. He wrote accepted policies for the UCP that included killing e-tabulators, connecting Alberta to more ports, and anti-WEF policies. I'm talking about Peter Scholz, so buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Peter Scholz. Sir, thanks for hopping back in studio. You made quite the splash about a week ago, a little over that. And, I thought...
I didn't even get wet.
I thought, why not bring you in studio and try this again, but, in person, so we can, be across from one another. We got to sit and have coffee last night and everything. So... thanks for making the trip and doing it here in studio.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
And before I go any further, we're going to do this so that when I get you wound up, I don't forget about it. So,
wound up?
That's right. He caught it, folks. He caught it.
Ooh, silver coin.
Every guest that comes in studio gets a 1-ounce silver coin from Silver Gold Bull. So,
cool. Thank you.
Appreciate you making the drive. And come on, do you collect silver at all? Are you? I don't want you to lease too many secrets, but
I bought about $5,000 worth of silver a few years ago. It's sitting in a secret place, and now it's worth $8,000, I think.
So a little bit of silver, folks. A little bit of silver. Wow. Appreciate you making the drive and a silver coin for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, you got, you shot me a list, and I started reading through it, and I'm like, oh, boy, this is going to be, we might be here for 6 hours, folks. We'll see where we get to today.
I've cleared my schedule, but I'm not sure people want to listen to my voice for 6 hours.
One of the things that you kind of, basically said is that you wish Canadians knew more of, and then there's a series of lists.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start with that? Do you want to start close to home, or do you want to go back in time to a little bit of history?
Totally up to you.
Well, let's start. Okay, I like a little bit of history. Let's go back. Whether you want to do Russia or Islam, your pick, or maybe you can blend the two. Who knows?
I might be able to. Actually, I probably can. So Peter's Cole's notes of certain things that I wish Canadians knew more about. And I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and we'll see if people like it or not. But so there's a few things about Russia and Islam, two separate topics that I kind of wish people knew more about. Number one is that not long after Islam was founded, it basically divided into three branches. Most people have heard of Sunni and Shia. There's also Abadi, which is in Oman only. And each one has a different subset of theologies. Now, the Quran, when you read the Quran, there's a lot of passages that can be taken on their own to mean some pretty harsh things. Like there's a section in the Quran which says, "Kill the infidels wherever you find them." Apologies to those who speak Arabic, and I'm slightly mistranslating it, but there's another passage further along in the Quran that says, "Do not worry about the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, because they also worship the same God." You have to meld those two. So what happened in Islam is it broke. You got a series of philosophers that wrote how to interpret the Quran, and different schools grew up around how to interpret the Quran in different contexts with different philosophies. And to my understanding, there's 13 schools of Islam. 95% of the issues you hear about in world news come from two branches of Islam, Wahhabi and Salafi. Wahhabi was founded in the deserts of Arabia in the 1800s and takes certain passages of the Quran very literally, tends to not really pay attention to other sections of the Quran, and completely ignores all the philosophers. Wahhabi spread into Sudan and caused a bit of a civil war when the British were there, and there's a whole history about the British fighting the Wahhabi rebellion in Sudan when they were in Egypt in the 1800s. And then Wahhabi was very influential in Saudi Arabia right up until September of 2001, when it was basically Wahhabis that came to the United States and flew planes into buildings. I know some people here wonder about whether the buildings were, there's conspiracies around the buildings and Tower 7, and I understand all that. But at the end of the day, there were Saudis that hijacked planes and flew them into buildings. They were Wahhabi. Saudi Arabia has purged the Wahhabis. Saudi Arabia does not have Wahhabi influence anymore because they were not interested in these wars. The Wahhabis were a bit more of a less philosophical sect. The Salafis were a bit more philosophical, but with the Salafis, they were heavily influenced actually by the Nazi emissary who came to Jerusalem in the 1930s and gave a book called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which to my understand was written either in the Russian Empire or near the Russian Empire in the 1910s, and is not written by Jews, but it was written as if it was written by Jews on how to take over the world through the banking system. And all these stereotypes about evil Jewish bankers, I think there are evil Jewish bankers. There's also evil Italian bankers. There's evil Chinese bankers. There's evil Russian bankers. There's good Jewish bankers. There's good Russian bankers. Whatever. It was a focus on one particular ethnic group, and it fomented the pogroms against the Jews in Russia, which is part of the reason I'm here. Is my Jewish side of the family got out of Russia in 1905 because of those pogroms. But the book is a fraud. It was written to foment anti-Semitism.
Who? Forgive me, maybe you said it, but do you know who wrote the book?
I don't. It's something you can look up on Wikipedia. But it was given by the Nazis to the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in the 1930s, and Nazism intermingled with Salafism in what was then called Transjordan, which was basically what is now Jordan and Israel. And you're still seeing that today in terms of how the Hamas ideology works. So there were warnings that came out of mainly Dubai in the 1990s, because and I have studied in a number of Muslim countries, including Malaysia, including Dubai. I travel in Oman, and the messaging I hear is the Salafis and Wahhabis do not represent Islam. when I was in Egypt, my tour guide, the day I was in Egypt on a tour, a group of Wahhabis in the Sinai blew up a mosque and killed 200 moderate Muslims in the Sinai, and he was pounding his fist on the dash and saying, 200 of my countrymen have been killed by people that claim to be Muslims. They're not Muslims. Indeed, the recent the way the Kafir children were marched out by Hamas in Gaza last week was denounced by the top mullah of Saudi Arabia and the top mullah of UAE. Anyway, in the 1990s, the UAE, and this is broadly passed around on X and other platforms, warning the West, do not invite Wahhabis and Salafis into your countries. They cause trouble. And the thing is, most of them left the Muslim countries of the Middle East because they were causing so much trouble, and they came to the only place that would accept them because nobody else wanted them because they bring troubles. And guess where they came? They came here. And when Trudeau was inviting thousands of Gazans in, I'm like, without vetting them appropriately or ignoring CSIS, I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? It's very dangerous, and it's inappropriate to our national security. And going back to what I wish people knew is people say, look, Islam hates Jews, or the battle in Israel is between Jews and the Muslims, or an Islamist blew up a plane. I'm going like, I always cringe a little bit when I hear that. I am a Christian. I do not believe the Quran is a holy book, but I respect the people that practice it, and I believe that many Muslims are honestly pursuing God in the way that they believe is best, and I respect them for that. And when I talk to them, they respect me for that. And that's the way a religious discourse should be. We're looking for God. We're seeking God. We're communicating to find God, but we're trying to serve a higher power and find the best way to do that. That's a journey of self-discovery, and you do that with respect. And that's the relationship I have with the Muslims in my life. Even though I'm a practicing Christian and half Jewish, it means nothing to me. But when you say Islamist, I'm going like, it's like saying a Christianist blew up a plane, right? Or Christianist they're all fundamentalist terrorists. I'm like, it's not really Islam. It's these Salafis and Wahhabi groups. So that's the thing about that I wanted to mention about Islam, and I think it would help Canadians understand a bit better because, the guys like Gad Saad, he criticizes Islam. He's from Lebanon, and he's seen what Salafists and Wahhabis have done to Lebanon. They've basically destroyed the country and the sort of damage they cause in Israel, and he blames Islam. And I'm like, I agree with you, but I wouldn't paint. There's 1.5 billion people in Islam, and you can't just all paint them with the same brush. Now, with sort of related to Islam is when the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476. The Eastern Roman Empire survived until 1453, when it was Constantinople fell to the Turks and created the Ottoman Empire. About 100 years after that, Moscow declared itself to be the Third Rome. And the reason that the Russian emperor was called Tsar is Russian for Caesar. So in the Russian language, the Russian Empire was basically like the Roman Empire of Russia. And sort of a slightly different, it's a different tack, but I guess what I kind of wish people knew about Russia, I have been there once, and I visited St. Petersburg, a small city called Yaroslavl, which is the original Russian capital, and then Moscow, which is the big capital. Very clean country, very safe country. The Russian people are, I wouldn't say they're friendly, but they're not dangerous. They're Russian. They were like, "Are you a Western spy?" the first time they meet you. But I was traveling actually with my 4-year-old daughter, and they were welcome with open arms. But I guess the key things I wanted people to know about Russia are they believe they're their own civilization, and they believe they paid the price for being imperialists when they let the Russian Empire, when they let the Soviet Union go. Where do I think Putin is coming from? I don't know if you can edit this out. This section on Russia is not going very smoothly.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Don't stress yourself about whether it's going smoothly or not. This is a podcast, for Pete's sake. You're trying to get some thoughts out, and it's interesting to me.
Okay.
Because like you said, like Russia believes it's its own civilization, I think is what you said. I'm like, well, isn't it? Do any of us here think they're not their own civilization? Like, just like I don't know. I feel like Canadians, although we're being certainly influenced, I feel like our own civilization. Like, I feel like our own group of people, although, as I say that, I kind of laugh because we're so heavily influenced by the United States of America. Whether it's, their government to their pop culture to everything becomes our culture. So maybe we're not our own civilization. Maybe we're an offshoot of the influence of Britain and the United States and probably others now, like as you see all the different reports coming about how many different governments are influencing us. When Russia says they're their own civilization, or I shouldn't say that, when you say that, I'm like, well, of course they are. I don't know. Like, I just doesn't dawn on my young mind to be like, no, they're part of, I don't know, the greater whatever.
Well, last year they formally declared themselves to be a civilization country, that they're their own civilization, separate from Europe, separate from the Chinese, and they will regard themselves as such.
Why do you think they had to do that?
For years, Russia's been asking the question, are we a Western country or are we not? Putin asked to join NATO to Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton said no, famously. And then with the war in Ukraine, the Russians allied with North Korea, of all people, and China, people that they typically have been either very awkward with or their enemy.
Say that again? People allied with, say that one more time?
The Russians allied with North Korea and China, which are two countries that they've always been rather hesitant around.
Against Ukraine, correct? That's
well, against the West.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like the Russians have a sense for divine purpose. They believe that they are the third Rome, and that the Roman Empire still exists in terms of Russia, and the laws and culture and civilization of 2,000 years survive in Russia. So,
if I may, I'm just curious, your thoughts. When you say Putin tried to be a part of NATO, for instance, right? And I've heard Putin talk about this. I've listened to different people talk about it. It's like, we want to be part of your friend group. Just let us be a part of NATO and we'll be fine. No. That would cause, or it should cause, I would think, a bit of is it an existential crisis? Is it, or it would just be like, so when you say they define themselves, we are a civilization. We are not Europe. We're not a part of the West. We're our own. That's probably as much for the outside world to understand as much as it is for them to start saying to themselves, correct?
Yes, they did go through an existential crisis in the 90s of poverty, and they came out of it. Russia is now quite a prosperous country now. There are pockets that are not prosperous, but it's a very, very big country. You need a year to explore it. I'm almost hesitant to talk about it on air, but there's two religious factors that I kind of wish Canadians knew or were aware of. And if you are a spiritual person and you take these things at face value, or whether you're an atheist or you disbelieve prophetic things, at the end of the day on the ground, it actually doesn't matter that much, because I believe that a large group of people, if they believe a prophecy or they believe some sort of divine purpose, they're going to make it happen anyway. So it's good to know the mythology, even if you don't believe it.
Sure.
So number one is the miracle of Fatima. That occurred. The purported story is that 3 peasant children in northern Portugal in the 1910s or 1930s were visited by the Virgin Mary, who said, "Call the people and I will give you a prophecy and a miracle." And the local priests supported them in this, and apparently around 50,000 people came. You can look this up. It's Miracle of Fatima near Coimbra.
I looked it up. Of course, now it doesn't.
Yeah, in northern Portugal. And, you could say it's mass population psychosis, or it was actual miracle, because what people said they saw in the sky doesn't always the same. Some people saw one crazy thing and other people saw a different crazy thing. But the message was fairly consistent. The message was, unless Russia is consecrated to God, the evil that is now growing in Russia will spread around the world. That for sure happened, because that's when Bolshevism was taking over Russia. And we are dealing with that today. We are dealing with that with Trudeau. We're dealing with that.
You mind if I read?
Sure.
Once again, this is, hopefully in years to come, folks, there will be, hey, Jamie, could you? Anyways, doesn't matter. The Miracle of the Sun, okay, also known as Miracle of Fatima, is a series of events reported to have occurred miraculously on October 13th, 1917. Attended by a large crowd who gathered in Fatima, Portugal, in response to a prophecy made by three shepherd children, Lucia Santos, Francisco, and Jacinta Mardo. I just butchered those names. Apologies. The prophecy was that the Virgin Mary was referred to as Our Lady of Fatima would appear and perform miracles on that date. Newspapers published testimony from witnesses who said that they had seen extraordinary solar activity, such as the sun appearing to dance or zigzag in the sky, advance towards the earth, or emit multicolored light in radiant colors. According to these reports, the event lasted approximately 10 minutes.
Yeah. So anyway,
I mean, I can go on and on and on.
Yeah,
and on.
The consecration didn't happen. Bolshevism and communism did spread around the world and have contributed to the mess we're in today. The Russians will be very aware of this, and most Russians are either atheist or Orthodox. And during the beginning year of Ukraine, the Pope actually consecrated Russia to God because there was pressure from within the Catholic Church. Go ahead and do this because we don't want the world to end, because we fear this is going to lead to World War III, and he did. So that's where we are now.
When did the Pope
that was like a year after the invasion started.
Okay.
Of Ukraine.
So like 2022.
About that, yeah. So it's something most people don't know about, but I think it's worth knowing about because it would shape the Russian worldview. Is like at a minimum their influence on world affairs. Okay, we created an evil that spread around the world. What does that mean for us? Because we created the evil and we did the spreading. What does that mean we should do now? Does that give them a sense of purpose? And number two, combined with this, this third Rome thing, I mean, holy pressure. And then, open up the book of Revelation just to really mess things up for the poor Russian folks. It talks about the four beasts of the apocalypse. Now, most interpreters have said the four beasts relate to the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire. I've never been convinced by that one when you read the books of Daniel and Revelation. And I know a lot of the audience here are not Christian and they're not familiar with the Bible. But the second half, the Bible is a very big book. It's divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament is basically talking about Christ and the prophecies after Christ and how Christian theology works. And the Old Testament is basically the Jewish Bible. In Revelation is the last book of the Bible, and it's divided into two halves. The second half is a book of prophecy, and that's the one that usually freaks people out because it has all this imagery and it has weird stuff going on, and no one knows how to interpret it or how do you interpret the dates, because it says, and this will happen for a time and a time is in half a time, and people, well, this means this or that means that, whatever. Anyway, it's very clear on the imagery of the four beasts of the end days. And the first beast is a lion that grows wings like an eagle, and then the wings of the eagle separate, and then becomes like it, and then it grows a heart. And when I look at that, I'm going like, boy, that sounds like, Britain, United States. Whether you believe me or not, lion with eagle, whatever. I'm not saying this is. I'm just saying I'm trying to provide theological context for my discussion next. The second beast is something like a bear. The third beast is something like a leopard, and the fourth beast is the final beast, and it's called the abomination. And I'm going, how many countries have the bear as their national animal? And then I look at Russia, and I'm going like, okay, combined with Fatima, combined with the third Rome thing, I imagine the Russian worldview is great regret over what's happened, but also determination to keep going. And the Russian culture has been of these, you have these incredible invasions like Napoleon and Hitler, millions of people dying, but then Russians pushing them out and ending Hitler and ending Napoleon, and indeed, when you read the end of World War II in the Pacific, what I'm hearing more and more, it wasn't the nuclear bomb that brought the Japanese to the surrender table. It was actually the Russians coming from the Western Front, coming across the Amur River and amassing to invade Honshu Island of Japan. So the Russians are like, we've done all these good things, we've done all these bad things, we have all these things we're supposed to do in prophecy. It's a very complex makeup. And then, just to lighten this up a bit, I read a story once that a group of stray dogs in Moscow were going around, and they had one cute little dog. And this little cute dog would go to people on its own, beg. Because it was a cute little dog, they wouldn't be afraid of it. They'd give it food and come back and feed the other dogs. And I thought, boy, in Moscow, even the dogs play chess. So what does this mean? I'm not sure, but it's insights into the mind of the Russian psyche, and insights into the mind of Putin, what may or may not be driving him. And I think the Russians are playing for world hegemony, but they're playing a very long game. I think their aim is 4 or 5 years that they would be the most powerful nation on earth. 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 generations. I want to be clear on that. A couple hundred years.
Yeah, they're playing a very long game.
They're playing a very long game, and they're letting the European Union dissolve itself.
Well, I mean, it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book that the Gulag Archipelago that had a really hard time with any government, any government thinking that far out. That's probably from growing up in Western culture, I would assume. But, like for someone to think beyond their lifetime, I just haven't run into too many people like that, right? Most people, even the longest term thinkers that I run into, maybe a decade, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
Most people don't think about 100 years. They're not thinking. I think
the Russians are thinking 300 to 400 years.
Right. And one of the things that Solzhenitsyn talked about in Gulag Archipelago was the big game of solitaire, and how different moves of government take a day or a year, but the game is always being played. And I read that, I must have read that line like, forgive me, 20 times, 30 times, doesn't matter. You get the point. Because I'm like, here's a guy who's seen the worst of humanity talking about, they for certain play out a game of a very long time. This isn't over the course of a year and then they're on to the next thing. This is they're really thinking long term. And I think, one of my problems, as you've heard from me multiple times since you've been here, and I think a lot of Albertans have problems with our own government, the speed at which they move. Well, if you're sitting in Russia and you're going, listen, we're looking at 400 years. If we do a move in 6 months or 6 years over the course of 400 years, that's pretty fast.
It is. What's frustrating is when it takes that long to, get your PA, possession and acquisition license for your rifle renewed. 400 years.
Correct.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that copies onto bureaucracy. So I'm just trying to share this because I think Canadians need to understand the long game. Listen, we are suffering because the communists came up with the long march to the institutions. You've had other commentators talk about that. That is certifiable, right? It's written down in black and white. They gave themselves 3 generations to undermine our entire culture, all of our social institutions, so that they could turn the West into a bunch of Soviet republics. Meanwhile, their source collapsed. The Soviet Union ended. So then they mutated, and the communism of Soviet Russia was objective, and it was communitarian. Objective means everything in the Soviet Union was about 4-year plans, 5-year plans, 6-year plans. We shall increase iron ore production by X% by doing the centralized planning.
Yes.
Okay. And communitarian, no private ownership. Okay, you can keep the man-wife relationship, you can get married and have children, but that's the only thing you'll own. Everything else will be owned by government because everything else will get corrupted, and then we'll have this enlightened class that will make sure that it's done properly. And of course, the enlightened class took about 6 minutes to start basically sucking everything into their own assets and building dachas everywhere. Where am I going with this? It was important too. The communism today that you encounter in Western universities is completely the opposite. It is subjective and it is individualistic. It's subjective in that I don't feel right. I feel like I'm a woman even though I'm growing a beard and I'm a guy, right? I'm feeling that. I'm feeling this, right? I'm not happy. I'm crying online. Therefore, I've been attacked. And individualistic. It boils down to the most granular level. So I would even say that the communists of Soviet Russia would look at the neo-communists in the West and they'd be like, small, weak little thing, right? They would have no respect for the communists of today. And it's depressing when they run
everything.
When you see Trudeau or Olaf Scholz, shares my last name, unfortunately, running these big, powerful countries, and or Biden, just like these people should be playing bingo, right? In some hall somewhere. They shouldn't be leading countries.
So do you think, as you talk and you build out the picture,
Uh-huh.
I've been having different discussions on here about Alberta. Well, Canada 51st state, Canada first, Alberta independence, on and on. These ideas roll in my head because I'm like, I don't see a way out of this. And in fairness, I go in the next decade. I just don't know if we can get out of this. And so I'm constantly like probing to try and find the answer, the way. Though here's where we go. And if you were to extrapolate that time longer, though, instead of a shorter time window, you realize you're going to go through some pain, and maybe there's a way, but it's going to take, a generation to get us out of what we're in. Because, the generation is sucked in right now into every single institution. Into, what does the UCP wrestle with? They wrestle with the NDP and the government they install, a bunch of the things in the bureaucratic sense that's been slowly getting installed over the course of decades.
I am not as pessimistic. Russia in 1990 was a hellhole. It was dangerous. It was crime-ridden. It was falling apart. There was independence motions everywhere. You go to Moscow today, it is as clean or cleaner than Tokyo. Admittedly, I was in Moscow in 2019, so I might be slightly out of date. But it was cleaner than Tokyo when I was there. I was there with my 4-year-old daughter.
What the heck took you to Moscow in 2019?
Oh, I took I took an international program through a Swiss university, so I had to travel all over the world taking these classes in metropolitan governance. So I was actually getting classes at the Moscow Institute of Economics or whatever it's called for a week. But, the real education is just traveling, having to get around the cities and live like a local for a week and just see what it's all about. Very, very safe country. Minor things that, my Russian friends would point out to me when we're in the subway. We're driving in the subway and every few seconds you feel a bit of a shift to the right or the left. And he said, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "That's because there's no subway tunnel in Moscow that's straight." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Why?" He says, "Because every 100 meters or 500 meters, whatever it is, the distance the bullet travels is the gap between these little jigs in the subway tunnel. Because when Moscow was planned, they planned for the entire population of Moscow to go into the subway tunnels to be protected from nuclear attack. And then for the follow-up invasion, there's ammunition down there that they can have all
fortify it.
They can shoot, right? People who are attacking them in the tunnels, so that they would have an entire underground war." And I'm like, I get it now, because Moscow is also huge. It's it's like 150 kilometers wide. You'd need like 10 or 20 nuclear bombs to blow it up. Admittedly, Nagasaki-sized nuclear bombs, maybe modern nuclear bombs can do it in one fell stroke. But 150 kilometers of width, it's a very sprawled out city. And I'm like, this thing is designed to survive nuclear war. Why am I talking about this? Yes, the Russians pulled themselves out of this in the 1990s, and now it's quite a prosperous country, with some exceptions. So by having these discussions, I'm like, in our previous talk, I talked about the history of Canada. Why is Canada there? And I'm saying, what is Canada's mythos? what is Canada's role in the world? And I'm asking all your viewers, what do you think Canada's role in the world is? Is it to spread hockey and love? Or is it something, which is important, but is it more than that? And I would say Canada has at least two fundamental roles in the world. Number one, we are the reason the United States doesn't control everything north of the Rio Grande. I talked earlier about building the railways and how Canada was structured, the Federation. I didn't talk about our military strategies in case of American invasion because they got pretty nasty. We didn't really have time either, but Canada prevented the most powerful nation in the world from taking over. If Canada was American, 10 million square kilometers, the population of what is currently within the borders of Canada would arguably be 3 to 5 times bigger than it is now. Why? Because the Americans build shit. Excuse my French. They build infrastructure. They make space for cities. They don't mince around with massive bureaucracies. They say, we are building this railway, we're building this highway, we're getting it done, putting a new city here, go. Right? Here, everything, all of our cities in the West are built as military. At the end of the day, one to protect American invasion from the north, one to protect against American invasion in the south. Once we had our defenses, we stopped, and all attempts have been discoordinated and underfinanced and not well planned out. The Americans would have railways everywhere, and there'd be new cities everywhere. We'd have 160 to, I'm guessing, around 150-ish million population. What is now Canada? Add that 150 million to the 360 or 370 that's currently in the United States. That gives you somewhere around 500 million. And to your viewers, I say, imagine if Kamala Harris had won an election in the United States with 20 million square kilometers and 500 million population. No country would come even close to the power of such a United States. Like, it's hard to fathom. No country in the world will come anywhere near. People go say the Americans are the greatest empire of world history. Sure, okay, yeah, all right. Perhaps more than the British Empire in terms of overall influence. I'll let historians be the judge of that. But like practically doubling the size of the United States, holy cow! And I go like, yeah, Canada's the most influential country in the world. Why? Because we held back the most powerful country in the world from being basically the world empire. Is that a divine role of our country? I'll ask you the question, the viewer. I don't know. But it's very easy to argue that by maintaining our independence, we prevented the United States from becoming an insurmountable power. Number two, what do people think of if you go to Egypt or Tanzania? I'm just in Tanzania climbing Kilimanjaro last month. And my taxi driver at one point, he said, "Oh, you're from Canada." "Oh, I dream of coming to Canada." "Oh, why do you dream of coming to Canada?" He says, "Because you're peaceful and you're prosperous and you can walk down the street and everyone respects you and nobody cares if you're black or white or pink or blue. You can do what you want." And I said, "And you can get a job." Like, you're a little bit out of date, my friend. But in terms of economy, for sure. But it tells you something. Sometimes when you're on the outside looking in, you can see more than when you're on the inside looking out. And I'm going like, I feel like Canada's mythos, of beavers and smart Mounties and whatever you want to call it, it's of a certain sense of optimism, strength that's controlled, dependability, and a bit of a beacon of this is what a civilized country is like. And where many people across huge distances can get together and agree. That is the Canadian mythos. And I believe that is our gift to the world. And we're not done yet doing that. And the problems that have mounted up, there's insurmountable. But what took 250 Liberals under Trudeau and 150,000 excess bureaucrats in Ottawa 9 years to dismember and make not work 42 million Canadians understanding their history and their role in the world can fix in a month.
I appreciate the optimism.
World runs on hope, dude.
I once had it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it just seems like, I don't know, like we're staring down the barrel of Mark Carney. I'm watching that and I'm going, I hope it's all BS. I hope the polls are completely wrong. I hope that Pierre Poilievre wins a slam majority, super majority. We walk in and we can curb some things immediately.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I believe that. Like I watch things going on, and once again, it's conversations with people such as yourself and others that I find really interesting. I've been texted different people from Ontario about, now by the time this airs, it'll have passed their Ontario election, and half of them are texting me back going, I didn't even realize we had an election. I'm like, really? I have no idea you have a provincial election going on, and these are the people that I am supposed to believe are going to show up election day and make sure Carney doesn't get in? I don't know. I guess I'm just like, I want Canada to be what I believed it to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a lot of, I've sat here with military men and on and on and on about the things that Canada did and stood for. But like, you look across our country, you talk about going to Kilimanjaro. The guy going, I want this and I want that and I want that. And I'm like, does any of that exist right now? I mean, certainly you walk in this room. We don't care about, I think it could be very true. But like Canada, as it's formulated right now, we can't stop fighting for. I don't mean give up. That is not what I'm trying to say, folks. It's just, the longer I go and the more conversations I have, I feel like at times we can be disillusioned by fixing Canada, and if that's possible. But then I hear your story about, in saying that all, then I hear your story about Russia, and I go, it's interesting. It's just a longer time frame on getting it fixed, and I'm so focused on how do we get it fixed at the fastest possible time frame. Like am I talking myself in circles here?
That's a Canadian way of thinking. A great YouTube video to watch is when that Ontario farmer with 8 kids moved to southern Russia. And the arguments he got into there with the bureaucracy and with the banking system, and it was actually, I don't know, his immigration. I spoke to him as immigration lawyer in Moscow. By coincidence, I knew his immigration lawyer, one of those 1 in a million chances, and he told me the detailed story, and it was hilarious because it was like half a dozen Russian cultural stereotypes running headlong into half a dozen Canadian cultural stereotypes. And it was just hilarious because he's like complaining and he's insisting they get things done, and the Russians are like, no, you can't complain about the local governor. He'll be angry, and it's like, well, I don't care, And I was like, yep, that's a Canadian farmer for you. They were good on him, right? And I have a few friends in Russia, and when I mentioned the story to them, they laugh and they're like, yeah, Russia, Russia needs Canadians because we need fresh blood to get our country moving again. But that's another story. I think the answer is if enough Canadians understand what Canada's about and where it's from, but also know thy enemy. Our enemies are hiding in secret. Our enemies are the Qataris, they're the CCP, they're the Democrats. We mentioned that before. I've also, somewhat hesitantly mentioned Nazi influences. Chrystia Freeland and her, standing in front of the Bandera flag, the black and white Bandera flag, which she rapidly erased from her social media account. They were a group of pro-Nazi groups. The fact that the Nazis were applauded in the House of Commons. When you get that sniff, knowing anyone who harbors Nazi sentiments is going to stay really quiet, and when they're brave enough to march forward, that sort of thing, in the House of Commons, that's scary. But know thy enemy and know what you're looking for. Understand that the Trump win was a major setback for the WEF and the New World Order. He is dismantling their state, and he's dismantling the financing for a good chunk of the WEF and these deep state institutions. I've read on X, so take it with a grain of salt, that USAID gave $1 billion to UBC about the time that I was going to school and being told you can't use Christianity as your ethics framework to practice your profession. Am I completely convinced of that? No, but someone's asking why would USAID give $1 billion to UBC? Good question. I mean, while we're at it, it's well known CCP and Qatar both give billions of dollars to American universities. Why would they do that? American universities don't lack for funding in other places. It's because there's an agenda. They want certain things to be taught. Qataris are pushing the Salafist agenda, and the CCP is pushing the communist agenda. And the two are in alignment for convenience in order to win. And what they want, they want to expand their influence. And in some cases, like China, maybe they want to have a new empire of some kind. I don't know. But Canadians need to understand who our enemies are. And what I am getting at is, Canada, you've been played real well. During COVID, you were told, wear your mask, get your shot, the shots that haven't been tested, to be a good Canadian. Otherwise, you're a risk to your society. And you're not a good Canadian. Guess what? Canadians banded together like, holy cow. Gerald Butts, who's Trudeau's political advisor and now Carney's political advisor, in my mind, he's practically a genius. He knows Canadians very well, and he is ruthless and cynical. So imagine if you have 20 minutes with President Trump and knowing his personality, which tends to be, if there's a weakness, it's hubris, and he's very bombastic, and he says things off the cuff and never apologizes. Very alpha male. So you come to him, your shoulders like this, your legs tight together. That picture of Trudeau sitting on the carousel. I'll try to imitate Trudeau.
Yeah, with his Dumb and Dumber haircut, yes.
Yeah. With the sweater inside out and backwards. And you go, say something like, well, Canada can't survive without the United States. What do you think Trump's reaction is going to be? And how embarrassing is that our prime minister would say that to a president in a closed meeting? If I'm prime minister of Canada, which I have no interest in being whatsoever, but saying if I was prime minister of Canada meeting Trump, I would say, okay, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And this is how I want to refine the the free trade agreement. And by the way, congratulations. I don't do that and go, oh, Mr. Trump, please, Canada can't survive without you. What do you think he's going to do? He's going to pounce in for the kill, and then he comes home, and not 5 days or 6 days later, in front of a group of women, he says, the Americans will be embarrassed because they didn't elect their first female president, and they're going to have, buyer's remorse is the word he's used. And this is against Trump. Again, bombastic with a touch of hubris. Of course he's going to freak out. Guess what? That was deliberate. They were playing him. Trudeau was playing him exactly the way Trudeau played all those women that escaped from him inside government. He wraps them in this world of truth and fake and manipulation and guilt and just entangles them in this fake world, right? He did that to Trump. Trump fell for it. And that was deliberate, because then Trump would say something like, oh, Canada should be the 54th state. You'd be our cherished 51st state. Well, guess what? Gerald Butts knows full well keeping the Americans out is hot-wired into the Canadian DNA. He knew that would cause an immediate reaction. It took, 3 minutes before people refusing to buy from Walmart. We're not going to buy American. We're going to fight for Canada. It took 2 seconds to get it all going. And then the Liberals had their intelligence machine, otherwise known as the CBC, and all their photo ops going, and they're waving the flag suddenly. Suddenly the flag is the right thing to wave, pouncing on Team Canada, and everybody's going for it. And the Liberals shot up through the polls. That was deliberate. That was phase 1 of re-winning the election. The high-speed rail thing was phase 2. I don't know what phase 3 is yet, but I'm sure they have phase 3 and 4 ready and lined up, ready to go.
You think we get an election here this spring? Or you think it's this fall?
I have no stinking idea. I can always understand what Butts did after he did it.
Can we survive Mark Carney?
No. Mark Carney is WEF. Mark Carney is not Canadian. He is 100% WEF. And honestly, I associate WEF with Nazi. I'll tell you why. Klaus Schwab has lived in Davos for a bunch of years, 20 years or something. When the COVID restrictions were coming down, I looked closely at where do I go with my family? Because this is getting intolerable. I'm a nationalistic Canadian, but my nationalism ends on where I may be put in prison without justice, right? Or where my children may be taken from me, or where I may be killed by maid, and then somebody says he was suicidal. That's where my nationalism ends when it comes to my family. So I was looking at moving out. I looked closely at a bunch of countries. One of them was Switzerland, and Switzerland is one of the toughest nationalization laws anywhere. If you want to be a Swiss citizen, you have to have lived in Switzerland for 12 years at least. 6 of those years, the latter 6 of those years, you must have stayed in the same community. At the end of 12 years, you may apply to become a Swiss citizen, and it means a lot. If you are a Swiss citizen, it means all of your progeny will be, and your progeny's progeny will be Swiss for all time. And this is basically the wealthiest country in the world. To get that citizenship, you need to get approval from the federal government, which is basically a criminal records check. You need to get approval from the canton or province, what they call provinces or cantons there. The canton needs to agree. Your town needs to vote on whether you would be a good Swiss citizen or not. Klaus Schwab is still a German citizen after being in Davos for 20 or 25 years. I'm sure he's applied to be a Swiss citizen. This community don't want him to be Swiss. Klaus Schwab is linked to Nazi past. Chrystia Freeland, as I said, is already linked through her grandfather to Nazis in Ukraine. And when you look at Trudeau's response to bringing it, we're one of the only countries in the West that's bringing in Gazans, I mean Salafi Nazis. He's ignored blatant hate crime in Canada. We're one of the only Western countries that did not light up yesterday or 2 days ago in orange because of the way the Kefir baby brothers were killed. New York, Buenos Aires, all these countries around the world were lit up in orange. Canada didn't do that. And I'm going if you've watched Russian media, which I have over the last 2 years since I was in Russia, I keep an eye on it. I read media from many sources, but it's interesting watching Russian propaganda media. I know it's propaganda, but the Russians are always very careful what they attack. In Germany, they attacked Olaf Scholz for being an oaf. In Macron, they always attacked France for having a leader that basically slept with anything and everybody. They attacked the Brits for being excessively militant and causing wars everywhere. They would attack Joe Biden for not knowing what he was doing. And they would always attack Canada for being a place where Nazis could shelter. And I'm like, that kind of freaks me out because I look at Chrystia Freeland and I'm like, and now I look at Mark Carney, who works directly with Schwab. The fact that Mark Carney, the former Prime Minister of Britain, actually came over here and said, don't hire Mark Carney because he ruined our British economy and we're not listening. I'm like, and the fact that he was sitting beside Trudeau advising him and Guilbeault on financial policy for the last 5 years. Guys, as optimistic as I am, if he wins a majority, sorry, I'm leaving Canada and I'm going to try to take Alberta with me. And I'll ask a whole lot of Albertans to come with me too. Because that crosses that line. Carney will be imprisoning people like me and you, Shaun, and people who are listening, and maybe a few others. Carney will not stop at that. This is, the WEF views Canada as the holdout to get back at the United States, to take back the United States at some point, because we're right next door. Understand our role.
We know that Donald Trump is no moron, correct?
No.
So in the game of chess, right? One of the things that you talk about, like Canada's role in this. You wish that we put a little more thought into. In saying that, hockey is a great game of strategy, right? It is.
Mm-hmm.
Chess is one of the ultimate games of strategy and thinking moves ahead. And anyways, you get my point.
I sometimes wish that Canadians would stop fighting in hockey and instead save all that militancy for their politics to get rid of these jerks in power.
Well, it's funny. Where I sit is I'm just like, I just want to, I'm not, as people keep running into me, they're like, you're not as big as I thought you'd be. I'm like, no, I'm not. But man, did I throw one mean hip check back in the day. And I would just love to get a couple of these politicians on the ice and have them do a little dipsy doodle, because that's what they'd be, and just send them into the stands. Regardless, that's my hockey. There you go. I literally brought up some hockey analogies this morning, and I got crickets from her. I'm like, what? This is our anyways. It's our culture. We're built on a lot of different stereotypical types of hockey players, and you need them all, and you need that type of fanfare to gravitate into the political realm, because it's what's shaping our future. So I go back to Donald Trump. Okay, so he gets played by Trudeau the first go around. He's now staring at the fact that, guys, it looks like Mark Carney could be the next. Ooh. They're not going to just sit idly by and let the WEF take Canada, are they? I have to assume
I'm not in the Oval Office. I can't tell you. Your guy yesterday would know more about that than I did. Peter, whatever his name is.
Yeah. Oh, man, why do I keep spacing on Peter's name? McIsaac.
Yeah. Like I said in the last podcast, if Trump has information on the role of the mafia and the Liberal regime and Mark Carney or Trump or Trudeau, let the Canadian people have it as publicly as possible. I'm eagerly awaiting the Epstein.
Well, I actually, as we're talking, and literally the top post right now is Mr. Bean checking his watch. It says everyone is on X patiently waiting for the Epstein client list to get released.
Right. Okay.
So it hasn't been released as we sit here talking.
I'm hoping very much that ends Carney's career, because Chrystia Freeland, it's pretty obvious she is a compromised individual, and I can't imagine anyone voting for her, especially after, let's drive the tanks over the truckers.
Not to mention, she's just so closely attached. I know it sounds really stupid, because we know Mark Carney's involvement, but it's kind of like the shadow involvement. And for some reason, a lot of the regular population voters who don't pay attention as closely, for some reason, see Carney as detached from everything that's happened in the last 10 years, where Freeland, you can't detach her from the last literally 10 years. Even CBC can't detach her, right? But Mark Carney, there's like this, this illusion that he wasn't a part of it, which breaks my brain, because I don't understand that, right? Knowing everything we've just talked about. I don't know. The Carney thing, it's like, you watch Justin Trudeau and you go, this has to break him, right? And it doesn't break him. And then the next thing you're like, this has to break him, right? And it doesn't break him. With Carney, I'm like, I wonder if he's on the Epstein list. If that'll break him. I seriously, I literally, like the P. Diddy thing. I'm like, this should break everyone's career. And has it? I mean, P. Diddy, yeah. But has anybody else? I mean, I don't know. I love the audience's thought on this. Like, did it break J-Lo's career? She was in the building. As far as I understand, LeBron James took time away, but has it broke his career? I don't know. Like, on and go the list. Leonardo DiCaprio was in those parties. Has it broke his career? Doesn't look like it. And on the A list goes. Now, does it once again mean that just because you were there, all of a sudden you're a part of this grimy world? Well, I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't, It's like, I just don't know. Like, is this going to stick to Carney to sink him? I bring in Pete, he just...
I think it'll stick enough. I think Toronto is soft liberal. Toronto, I think, would be swayed by that. Ottawa is hard liberal, but not impenetrable. You get into Montreal is impenetrable liberal. Toronto is like, 2 months ago, if you looked at the polls, 90% of the seats that we're going to be liberal at the next election were Montreal.
I'm going to turn a really hard left corner because
I thought you were right wing.
Going to turn a hard right corner. Just me. I'm going to steer the conversation a little different direction for a couple seconds.
Sure.
You know, as you talk more and more, what I'm realizing is not only are you well read. You know, if people go back and listen the first time, we get about an hour in, roughly this time frame, and I'm going, "Who the heck are you?" And as you talk more, and as we've got to sit and know one another a bit, I'm like, you are very, very well read. At least that's my initial thought process. And
I was well educated.
And my second one is you're very, very well traveled. And I probably can't put enough varies there because I feel like at times I'm well traveled. But then you start listing off some of the countries and everywhere you've been. And I'm like, would you suggest that every Canadian, every person on the planet, should get out of their comfort zone and go experience a different culture, because like when you start talking about Montreal, what gives your or even Russia, let's pick on Russia for a second. When you start talking Russia, one of the things that gives your words weight is you've been there. You know, when you start talking about, just pick a topic, one of the things is you've been there. I find very few people like that. Maybe that's why I find you so intriguing, I guess, is like you get talking about all these different places and all the different sects of or schools of Islam. You've been to a whole bunch of them. You've interacted with a bunch of them. You've sat. I'm like, would you suggest to people listening, you want to start to understand the world, go experience the world?
Absolutely. Yeah. You never know what you're going to find when you get to a new place. You can go with all the preconceived notions you can imagine, but I have been completely shocked every time I've stepped foot off a plane or a train in a completely new country. And I was scared. The first time I took the train from, when I entered Russia, I took the train from Helsinki to St. Petersburg. And I remember taking a screenshot on Google Earth of just, I'm like 100 meters from the border. And I'm like, oh, this may be the last time I ever send a text from my phone, right? Because the big bad Russians, I'm taking I'd gone there for the schooling program, so I was joking, but
kind of not.
When you cross the border into Russia, you can tell immediately, I am no longer under American influence. Almost anywhere else in the world you go, when you get off the plane, you can see those little tiny senses of Americanism, the way things are sold, the way people act, the kind of things that are on TV, what you can get on your phone, what you can't get on your phone. And when you get into Russia, no, you're not in the American influence zone anymore. And that was a little bit scary. And when you walk off the train in St. Petersburg, like, what am I going to find? Well, you're going to find a bunch of taxi drivers that want to charge you 15 euros to go 150 meters to the hotel that you didn't know was there. So you had to question them. But then you scratch beneath the surface and you're like, this is a civilized country. And it has an incredible arts and culture scene. There's cathedrals that are you can hear monkish hymns from 1,000 years ago being sung with a beauty that I've never heard before. You can take your kids to a ballet in the Kremlin. In the middle of the Kremlin is a ballet house. Okay, it's not the FSB headquarters is not in the Kremlin. The FSB headquarters, which is their secret police, is near the Kremlin, but it's next to the Lego store. Like literally, it's like, the CIA is. You
think a guy having these conversations, I'm pointing at me, folks, if you can't see that, would be, is there a country you're like, well, I don't know. Russia fascinates me. But I also go like, I've been having a lot of weird conversations. I don't know if they're like, do you think I'm welcome in every country? Or you're like, nope, definitely not these four.
I'm nervous about Ireland and Britain right now.
Yeah, fair enough.
I had to go through London to get to Tanzania. And you now need to get a special kind of visa. It costs £10, $10, whatever. And you're supposed to put this app on your phone so you can, and it's not just one visa, it's like good for 3 years or something. Come and go. Anyway, I download the app. 155 megabytes. The app. And I'm like, 155 megabytes for a visa? 155 megabytes? No, this is MI6 watching everything on my phone. It's MI6 taking a screenshot every 2 seconds and then having some sort of AI algorithm watching everything I do or see and reading everything I write. That's what this app is. I deleted the app and went through the website, and the website makes it real difficult, but I got my visa through the app. I'm like, this makes me feel uncomfortable. And when you hear about people writing even mildly critical things on everyone's heard about it, about all the arrests in Britain.
Yeah,
it's
Facebook and different things.
And then when you
having
hear
the
about the
police show up.
Palestinian marches in Ireland, I'm not, I think at the end of the day the Palestinians should have a country, but you have to clean up the whole terrorist Hamas thing first. It's the state is not on the table for now until that's cleaned up, and I hope they come up with a solution for that. I'd suggest, why don't you follow the Dubai model? It works pretty well for them. So I'm a little bit hesitant about Britain or Ireland, so I keep my mouth shut. I haven't been to Ireland, but if when I was in Britain, I was careful what I texted, what I wrote, and where I went. I just was a good little Canadian tourist, and walked around Oxford and took pictures. Okay, but you're better known than me, so I'd be hesitant in there of all places. China, I'd be worried. I really want to go to some parts of China. I really want to see Xi'an. I want to see Shanghai. Really want to see China, but I'd be really hesitant, because I made my opinion about the CCP quite clear on here. And, their Great Firewall's got, 2-3 million people working for it, apparently. So they're watching everything on the internet. And I'm just like, if I apply for visa, they're going to check, right? They're going to look at everything online about me. And if you read the Chinese visa application, it basically reads like, you get the impression it's like, you're not welcome to our country. If you come here, we can kill you. So you better do what we say. That's the impression you get when you look at a Chinese visitor visa. So I'd be very hesitant about that one. Final one, same places you'd be worried about being arrested, or places you're worried about your personal safety?
No, personal safety isn't obviously, you go the wrong street in Vancouver right now. Personal safety is, I get it.
Yeah.
I actually, from a guy who's been as many places as you've been, I actually worry about taking myself and my family to a place and having this machine, and I'm just mean the podcast, and all the dissidents and all the criticisms I've allowed on about the government, about different people, about the CCP, you just name it. We've talked about just about everybody, Britain is my number one. I'm like, right now, everything going on there, it's like my heritage comes from England. I really want to go back there, but I'm like, I don't know if this is the time. And not because I'm like going to go there and cause a ruckus. More of like, I think I've probably caused a ruckus enough by having enough people on here that I'm like, I don't think I'm under the target. I'm not, I don't know, Tommy Robinson, right?
My fourth would be Romania, because Romania is basically controlled by MI6, and they just arrested their top presidential candidate on what are obviously nonsense charges.
So you said your fourth: Romania, Ireland, Britain,
China,
and China.
But I would replace.
So I would
replace number 4 would be Canada if Carney wins.
Yeah. Oh my God! Think of that, folks. Like I just think about that. So I played hockey in Finland, and while living in Finland, I was terrified of that border. But not like it kept me up every night. Just like can't go there, right? I've ran into so many people who fled the Soviets, and how horrific it was. They snuck out at the last hour, and on and on. I've heard so many stories that I've just been like terrified of it. But as I get older, I'm like, one place I really want to go? I want to go Russia. I just want to go see there and open my eyes up to it. When I was 20, me and the brother that you just met, Dustin, we biked across Canada. So we started out in St. John's, Newfoundland, and we biked across the country. Wow. And this is how I know Canada's full of amazing human beings, from Quebecers to Ontarians to Manitobans, et cetera, et cetera. And we always joke about the different provinces. But government, on the other hand, is different, right? We each, in every province, in every city you live, in every town council, et cetera, you realize what politics truly is. But the people, just for the most part, want to be treated with respect, left alone. A lot of, honestly, the 10 Commandments, right? I mean, that's basically Canada in a nutshell. And the beauty of it is just unbelievable province to province.
Yep.
But to think if Carney gets in and now becomes number 5 country, and the fact that Ireland and Britain are 2 of the countries you're like, I don't know if I go there. In fairness, I completely understand.
Well, I was hesitant. I had to weigh in my mind. This is before I was on your podcast the first time. Honestly, right now, if I wanted to go to Tanzania, I'd probably transfer not through London.
Yeah, well, I mean, now you're like, well, I probably wouldn't. I went on the SMP show, and
no,
I'm
but
probably not.
Canada. I would put Canada would replace Romania as the 4th place. I mean, you can also mention Turkmenistan or Belarus, which I have not been to, as very totalitarian countries. But almost like hard-nosed totalitarian in some ways is almost better, because you kind of know the rules.
Yeah.
This is a totalitarian state. Follow our rules, or we'll kick you out. But they kick you out. You don't disappear. It's the disappearing that's the scary part.
And China,
people disappear.
Yeah, Britain, Ireland. They're. I don't know. Are people disappearing, or are they just getting put into the correction side of the world, which I guess is kind of disappearing? Because, I think of Martin Armstrong on this side, back in the early 2000s, got locked away in the United States for 12 years. So you go against any machine, and I mean, look at Canada. Actually, I'll just take it out of the way. The Coots boys,
yeah,
right? 6.5 years, and you go, that's in Canada, folks. Under the watch of every politician right now. And when you go against the machine will try and make you disappear. Just think of all the different world leaders or influential figures in history. I mean, they shot Trump in the head, for Pete's sake.
Yeah, in Canada they don't put you in prison. They just keep you in the court system for 10 years and use up the half of your useful working life. And
drain your finances.
Drain your finances and your energy and your emotional reserves, and scare the living hell out of anybody else, because they would people would rather go to prison for 6 months if the trial is over and done with in a week than to go through years and years and years of uncertainty.
And being dragged through the mud.
The court system is the punishment now, in many cases, and the prelude to the court system. Yeah, no, I agree. It's terrifying. But if Carney gets in, it's going to be Coots times 10,000. And I don't want to be one of those guys. I remember 5 years ago I was joking. This is what they're going to do. They're going to try to. This is why I give great thanks to Danielle Smith when she said, "So there's going to be no soji in Alberta," because I'm like, this is how they do it. They're going to tell your kids that that they're the wrong gender. Here, have a Hershey bar. You can, if you say you're the wrong gender. 1 trip to a psychologist. Okay. Say you're a girl, dress up like a boy once or whatever, and you can have a candy. Then the parents put up a big fuss. They take away the kids. They're ignoring the kids that are actually being beaten up or raped in really dysfunctional households. You can't get support for that, but they're gonna act on those ones to scare all the other parents in the country. And then when the parents are depressed enough, they'll say, "Hey, do you want to have maid?" Right? And I'm like, that's not going to happen. And that's when the COVID lockdown came and when Trudeau said, "I'm shutting the border," and you can't get on a train or a plane, and Biden shut the border, I was like, I will leave the country for that not to happen. I didn't, because my youngest was so young that it was just I couldn't see how we were going to make it work. So I gritted my teeth and we stayed. And now here I am causing trouble. But that was their plan. So when Danielle blocked that one, I spoken to O'Brien, I think his name is, other people working behind the scenes to say DEI needs to stop there first. I was like, thank you. You took a load off. My life has been half as stressful since that happened, because I'm no longer watching the school. Are you trying to get my kids to go under the knife, a perfectly healthy 10 or 12 or 14-year-old girl or boy, to undergo unchangeable sterilization, unchangeable surgical alteration? I'm like, because in my mind, that is pushing. There's been 2 societies in world history that readily practiced child sacrifice. One was the Canaanites, and one was the Aztecs. Both of those cultures were wiped to a person off the face of the earth. That's a historical precedent. There have been a lot of cultures that, will kill children or will mutilate children, but to my knowledge, in terms of mass sacrifice of children, there's only two. And I'm like, cutting up kids and sterilizing them, it's not actually killing them, but it's sure getting close. And we need to be scared. And we need to be more scared because of the historical precedents of what happens in this country. And I remember I was disappointed with Ontario because Ontario pushed this agenda first. And 10 years ago, I was more optimistic. I'm like, well, surely when the Ontario educational system starts going after kids, the Ontario parents are going to freak out, and they didn't. They still haven't. I'm like, what is going on in the East? Like, guys, grow a pair, do something. Like, you're voting for Carney, really. Do you have any idea what the implications of that? It is the end of Canada. Carney as Prime Minister, elected in a majority government, is the end of Canada. We will not survive that. And with all my optimism, it'll go too far. It'll either end in terms of the country falling apart, or it's going to end with an American invasion, or it's going to end in some kind of civil war. Because he's going to do things that you are not even beginning to imagine yet.
Well, I agree. I don't know. I don't even know what to say to that. It's like, what more needs to be said? Like we stand in a very dangerous time all over again. We just haven't been able to exit this series of events. I don't know, this time frame, right? This liberal hold on Canadians' minds and bank accounts and
mm-hmm.
influence on society. And we stand really, like, I feel like we're really close to certain things happening, and maybe I'm a little off in some of the things, but like one of the things is, carbon tax could disappear in the next year, just
mm-hmm.
like that, boom, gone.
Yep.
I think it could be just gone.
The only tax that has a sales tax on it.
Correct. and then I think there would be a huge push to have the CBC, if nothing else, just to fund it, like.
Mm-hmm.
And by extent, a lot of that would just start to dissolve because if they're not being funded, it kind of dries up. It's kind of like your theory with U.S. aid. I think I can't remember if that's, but like the money funneling into the colleges. Once it starts to dry up, well then they're the money's gone. Once the money's gone, well, where are they going to go get more money from? I'm sure there will be some options, but like as a whole, you start pulling $1 billion from the CBC. What happens? Like,
you also have to reduce funding to the universities, all these ideologically motivated professors that are living off the public dime, and kids' student loans is what they're living on, and they're fomenting all these ideas. I'm hoping for the best, but I'm also planning for the worst. And we talked a little bit about how Alberta can prepare itself for the worst case scenario. And I'll summarize them very, very briefly. And this is mainly for the Albertan and Saskatchewan audience. And I believe it's important to know those things. And I believe Alberta and Saskatchewan and possibly parts of British Columbia and parts of Manitoba, I don't know, whatever, need to think, what do we do if Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa elect
Mark Carney, and we end up with a pseudo-Nazi government with an extremely hostile in the United States considering an invasion. The more able we are to function with Ottawa in complete disarray, the better off we'll be. And it also gives us more leverage to hold back the worst inclinations of, I don't even want to say liberals, because there's been a lot of good liberals. These are neo-Nazi, neo-communist people we are dealing with here.
They are fascistic in tendencies. They are controlled by international parties that have no interest whatsoever in the well-being of the average Canadian person. And there is a proud history of very good Liberal prime ministers, but they are not part of the party anymore. When guys like John Manley says Trudeau needs to leave, things have gone, because he was finance minister for a bunch of years. Chrétien is still silent, but Chrétien is 90 odd years old, and I feel like I can do my Chrétien impersonation at some point for a laugh to lighten things up. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So the key things I want Alberta and Saskatchewan and other western provinces and even eastern provinces to consider as some practical measures. Number one, develop a provincial FinTrack. What is FinTrack? FinTrack is an acronym that means something like Financial Transaction for Terrorism and Money Laundering, something like that. I don't know. The easiest place to get a hold of a FinTrack, Switzerland does it the best, of course. Every day, the Switzerland Ministry or Financial Oversight Board or something has an Excel sheet that they update every day on their website. And it has a list of all the financial institutions that are in Switzerland, ones that meet code and don't meet code. They recommend you don't put money into the ones that don't meet code. And they do that because there's so many financial institutions in Switzerland that it's to make it so that it's a country that the financial transactions are run by law. And when it's on the doesn't meet code, it basically is saying, yeah, I'm a dictator of Turkmenistan or something, and I would need to funnel away $10 million. But it's also saying to them, if you put it in that account, we're going to be watching it. Switzerland does it the best. But every country has a FinTrack system, including Canada. Now, here's the thing. Our Constitution gives federally chartered financial institutions are regulated by the federal bureaucracy. Provincially registered financial institutions like credit unions or the ATB, and some other banks I think as well, are registered with the province of Alberta. When the federal government declared the Emergencies Act, then they started closing down bank accounts for people that contribute $10 to the convoy or whatever. That automatically applied to all financial institutions in the country. What I'm saying is Alberta, as a higher priority than establishing provincial police force, is to establish its own FinTrack, its own financial reporting system against terrorism and money laundering. That will not be constitutionally covered by the Emergencies Act. So if we have another Emergencies Act under a totalitarian liberal regime,
they can't force Alberta to shut down. They can't force.
It means your money in a credit, your money in a service or whatever credit union is still going to flow. Second, as we talked about the last show, there's a huge amount of money in Canada that is money laundering, and it's not being oversight because of extremely weak white-collar crime laws, and it's massively padded the Vancouver and Toronto real estate markets. I actually think part of the reason Calgary is still affordable because I suspect, but I'm not sure, that Danielle Smith is doing some things behind the scenes to keep them out. But I don't have any evidence except that it smells that way. And Danielle, if you're listening to this, thank you very much. And if you did do it, and if you didn't do it, then please consider doing it to make sure it stays that way. But anyway, we need an Albertan FinTrack, and I'm pushing. I strongly advise both Alberta and Saskatchewan and other provinces to do that. Other ones, there's been more media attention spoken to getting a provincial police force or getting a provincial pension plan. Those are valuable tools as well. There's a lot, the NDP are attacking it wholeheartedly, and there's people on the right that are worried it's going to cost too much and all that sort of thing. And I think I'm glad those discussions have started, and I encourage those discussions to continue. Because just having the discussion, having it on the table is in fact leverage, right? You're saying to Ottawa, you're going far enough that we're looking at how to run things better. And we're looking at other options. We're not saying we're leaving. We're saying you need to up your game, buddy. Think of a woman married to an abusive alcoholic husband. her biggest power is her feet, as a threat to use her feet. And I've met guys that have come around and cleaned themselves up because of that threat from their spouse. Whereas it seems like Montreal and Ottawa seem to just run back to their abusive partners at a moment's notice. It's kind of weird. There's FinTrack, police, pension. What was the other one? Oh. In the midst of conversation, I had so many data points, I lose track. Do you have a list?
I do have a list.
Yeah. You can edit out this part, but
We don't edit on this show. I mean, we do. People always give me a rough time because there's some, you miss some things when you don't edit as much. But as people know, I don't like editing too much. I'm tired of the editing.
Fair enough.
I like a little. The awkward silence for us is like 3 seconds. For the listener driving around, it's you go back and listen. It's hardly anything. And even if it was something, whoop-de-doo. You got banking, Alberta
Revenue Agency.
Revenue Agency.
Quebec doesn't use the Canada Revenue Agency. The Canada Revenue Agency is highly compromised. And not to mention incompetent to the nth degree. For anybody that actually does their own taxes, they know just how incompetent it is. They're so incompetent that I know retired CRA people that call CRA incompetent because they try to do their taxes, and then they're reassessed on certain things. Like, no, the code says this, and they go, no, it doesn't. And they say, yeah, it says code, because I worked with the code for 25 years until I retired, right? CRA told me you can't use midwifery expenses as a tax deduction. They wanted to deny me using midwifery expenses for the birth of one of my kids. I'm like, because I wasn't covered because I was in a different province. Long story. But anyway, I looked at their website. Yeah, midwifery is there. It's on your list. Oh, sorry. You do realize you just reassessed me for $7,000 in deductions and then sent me a bill for $2,800 based on that I can't use that deduction, right? Well, it doesn't matter. You found it.
This is why for Canadians, Albertans, is myself is like we have to understand the problem. We have to understand we have to learn. We have to continue to understand how our country works and operates. And I know there's a ton that do, but you've been hearing lots of my
anybody that doesn't
air.
check their own taxes, you're being screwed. They are taking more tax than they should because they play games with me every single year. I have been reassessed on average twice a year for the last 20 years. I have lost one reassessment that was like for $1.25, which I sent to them in pennies because I was pissed off. I taped 125 pennies to the letter and sent to them. But Alberta needs its own revenue agency. Quebec has its own revenue agency because Quebec is set up for maximum leverage. They're saying we can walk now, and you can't let us walk because you got 4 provinces on one side, 5 on the other, etc. Half of your capital city is effectively in our province. So we're going to leverage this. We have the second largest share of the votes in the House. We're going to leverage this. Alberta needs to think more that way. Maybe not be as cynical and abuse the situation, because Quebec definitely abuses the situation. I'm not saying for us to abuse it. I'm saying for us to have that leverage. And then we can come back to the corridor discussion when you're ready on why I believe we should have corridors ready to go, why it makes an investment vehicle that is the only way we're going to survive the financial situation we're in, and where those corridors would go, and what I need, my call to the Albertan people and anyone who's listening who is an Albertan voter is these aren't going to happen without your support. Do you want to go into that now or later?
Sure.
Okay.
You're bringing it up, so let's.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know if we want to bring up the map, but maybe people can't relate. But I said earlier in my last podcast that, I talked about Western Canada 1.0 being basically 2 main railways, one being Vancouver to Winnipeg and the other one being St. Prince Rupert to Winnipeg, and then a whole bunch of spur lines. And then Western Canada 2.0 should be two new railways, one being from Hudson Bay to north coast of British Columbia to be the Northwest Passage by rail, and the other one to be a railway from the Edmonton area up to Fairbanks to act as to create Alaska as basically the next American port and funnel all that traffic through Alberta. There's a lot of geography in this. I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours with maps figuring out where the corridor should go. And my argument, and that of associates, some of whom I have permission to mention their name. One is Donald McInnes, who built the power line from Prince Rupert up to Dease Lake, British Columbia. He actually built something and didn't get involved in a scandal afterwards. And Shaun, who I worked with in Anchorage at 808 Rail, he's pushing the Alaska side along with the former Lieutenant Governor of Alaska, Mee Treadwell. I'm working actively with them. I'm also working with folks on the Neestinen proposal, which is the proposal to Hudson Bay. And I'm in preliminary discussions with a couple of groups in British Columbia about that as well. My argument and their argument is you need to set up these multimodal corridors that are ready, that are investment ready, and you define the corridor basis on the topographical limitations of rail, because rail is the most transformative in terms of growth. And because rail is most limited, if you can put rail there, you can put anything else there too. So you're basically investment ready for a whole network of pipelines, power lines, whatever, railway, highway, whatever. There's only two ways to Alaska. That's something I want your readers to know. There's one route through Dease Lake, British Columbia, through Fort St. James. So the trains would have to come either up through Prince George along the Caribou Line, or they'd have to come in from Jasper and then head north, turn left at Fort St. James, and then go up a new railway through Dease Lake, which would connect with either Whitehorse or Watson Lake, and then extend from there. The other route, and that route is proven out, and the other route is through Alberta, and it crosses the piece at Fort Vermilion. All possible routes through Alberta converge at Fort Vermilion, which is near high level. The reason they converge there is the Peace River has a heck of a canyon from La Crete all the way into the WAC Bennett Dam in British Columbia. It's 250 meters deep. A 250 meter deep canyon for a Class 1 railway may as well be the Grand Canyon when you're talking about mile-long trains with 354,000 pound cars moving at 80 kilometers an hour. Getting something that big, 100 or 200 cars down 250 meters and then back up again, is enormous cost in energy and mechanical wear and tear. You want to keep the train on the level as much as possible. And downstream of Fort Vermilion is swampland. Very difficult to build on for big, heavy trains. People go, why is it difficult to build? It's flat. Well, when you're in a boat and you're going in a boat and there's that wave, that V wave at the bow of your boat. Okay. Now imagine this. A train does the exact same thing, except you don't see the wave because it's on ground instead of on water. But if the train is on swamp, you will actually see the V wave because the ground is so moist that you'll see the earthquake waves moving out from it. And each passage, everything degrades and falls apart. So the Alberta route, which is 400 kilometers shorter than the BC route, goes through Fort Vermilion. I just briefed the Economic Development Agency for Northwest Alberta on this last night, and they're going to be writing a letter to MLA Shane Getson at his constituency office. And I did ask him before this interview, can I give out your email? He said, maybe give out my constituency, not my personal email, because if a lot of people write in. Anyway, we need Albertans to know that they support the development of corridors. That's a convergence zone. From that point, there's two routes north and west out of Alberta. One goes through Rainbow Lake. The other one goes into Northwest Territories. I won't go into details there. Those are the only two possible routes once you cross the bridge, or a new bridge at Fort Vermilion. And down southward, there's three routes, either through La Crete or through Red Earth or through Wabasca, one of the three, to get you down to the Slave Lake area. And from Slave Lake, you want to connect with the CP and the CN in the Edmonton Class 1 railways in Edmonton, either most likely through Redwater, or alternatively on the west side of the Swan Hills. But it can be done, and as I said, the kind of traffic that was forecast for connection to Anchorage, opening up Alaska as a port for the Americans, was equivalent to what is on the current CNR line through Edmonton. So we'd just be seeing that kind of traffic going north-south through the province. And any communities on or near that, or First Nations along that route, are in a strong leverage position to negotiate terms for industrial parks, trade zones, new communities, major urban expansion, etc. So by doing this, I'm also saying the Alberta population, as it grew at 4.5% last year, that's an extreme rate of growth, a doubling time, I think, of 22 years. I don't think Alberta is going to stay at 4% growth, but even if it goes down 2%, it's still a 35-year time for doubling. So Alberta's going to have 10 million people by 2050, I'm reasonably sure. Now, if you go on the government website, it's going to say the Alberta population is going to be 7.3 million in 2060. If you crack open that number, it's forecasting a population growth rate of 1% per annum, which Alberta has only ever experienced like in 2008 and during COVID. Alberta's always been a higher population growth rate. Our population is exploding. I anticipate it's going to continue to do so, and we're considered to be something like a free speech bastion in Canada. So all Canadians that resist government overreach tend to want to come here, and I can see that continuing. Plus, which we have affordable homes, and so I'm saying, let's build space by putting in the infrastructure now, infrastructure that'll pay for itself.
How can I'm just I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
I had Shane Getson on.
Yep.
I believe, if memory serves me correct, and maybe Shane can correct me on this, it was fall of 2021, and he talked about these economic corridors. Okay, and I was like, wow, this is brilliant. How long to get this? Like how long? And he's, sorry, Shane, but typical government, nobody will ever be like, well, by August 1st of 2027, this will be, unless you're the Liberals and they just start throwing out dates and numbers and everything else and then never follow through with it, regardless. So these economic corridors sound, I don't know, not common sense? Is that the right word to use? I don't know. And so you go, we need the Alberta population. The Alberta population to do what? Because I sit and listen to you and I go, yeah, sounds great. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
I have Shane Getson on. He's been all over North America talking to everybody. Everybody's all for it. And then when it comes time to do anything with it, and I actually don't know the time frame, you could probably add into this, I feel like nothing happens. So then you go, but the Alberta population, and I'm going, okay, so what can the Alberta population do other than listening and go, seems like a pretty good idea, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Pipeline down to the States seemed like a pretty good idea. Pipeline out to the coast, pipeline across Canada. All those seem pretty good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say the Alberta population, what are you thinking of in particular?
What they're going to do for a living?
No. How they can help this?
I'll give you a little bit of backstory, and I'm being a little bit careful in my words because I've worked a lot of unpaid hours. This is what I want to. This is what I want to do. This is my passion for my career. I'm a regional transportation planner. This is and nation building is kind of built in my blood. And I build a lot of positive relationships within the government of Alberta. So I'm very hesitant to like this person did this and that person.
Yeah, sure.
That's not what I'm coming across. I'm trying to come in the spirit of constructive criticism. The messaging internally and externally from the government of Alberta is not completely consistent. And I share Shane's vision 100%, and I believe Shane shares mine. How do I put this gently? The Ministry of Transportation is a little bit uncomfortable with rail for two reasons. One is that rail has a very large history of failure. Believe me, I know, because A2A collapsed because of financial mismanagement, and I ended up being laid off along with others, and never got my severance payment. But other big infrastructure projects attract bad people. Rail tends to be the most visual. Look, the Trans Mountain Pipeline was supposed to cost $4 billion. They had allocated the right of way like in the 1930s or 40s to twin the Trans Mountain through Jasper down to Vancouver. And the company was saying we can do it for $4 billion. And once the feds took over, it cost $40. Where do you think $36 billion went? Do you think $36 billion went into steel and moving earth? Or do you think it was investments in Maui and, maybe something in Fiji?
I don't even need to comment.
A couple of ski resorts, maybe a guitar played by Mick Jagger at some point. Maybe Trudeau's slush fund, I don't know. I don't approve, but it shouldn't cost that much, right? A rule of thumb, for example, in southern Alberta, which is the easiest place to build rail in the country, is a rule of thumb is a 1.3 to $1.5 million per kilometer, from not including land costs. This is just construction, gravel, steel, ties. That's it. Okay. There was one near scandal in southern Alberta about when the new government took over. I will not give any more details because I don't want to tick off anybody and I don't want to embarrass anybody. But it was a small scandal involving a well-known firm that didn't do its job properly, and it was not even building a new. It was just assessing an old line whether it could be used more heavily, right? So what I find with all infrastructure projects is you need project managers who are passionate about it and are really looking at the books closely and aren't willing to take nonsense. And you cannot have government leading these things. So rail tends to be the most visible. People are more aware of it because it's built in public places. I mean, look at the Green Line in Calgary. Nenshi has messed up a lot of things, and I'll talk about Nenshi a little bit more later, about something that's more unsophisticated. But the planning for the Green Line and the cost estimates for the Green Line were pencil sketches on backs of napkins. It was not well done, and I feel kind of bad saying that because I know some very well-meaning people that were involved in that project at the early stages, and they did the consultation properly and they listened to the people, but they trusted some of the credentialed individuals a bit too much. When you're leading these projects, you really need to look closely at what everyone is doing. Just because they have letters after their name doesn't mean they're perfect. And you know what? I think our society has had to learn that question the hard way. I mean, look at the doctors that said, "Thou shalt take this vaccine, vaccine," which is not a vaccine; it's an mRNA that makes your body create spikes. And when you ask the doctor, okay, so it creates spikes, how does your body clean up the spikes? Oh, I don't know. It just makes you immune to COVID. No, seriously, how does the body shut down the spike making mechanism? Oh, I don't know. Okay, so my body's going to be producing spikes for all time? No, you don't have to worry about it. No, seriously, if I'm injecting something that's going to make some of the cells in my body produce these spikes that are going to hurt me, how does my body shut it down? Look and look and look. Finally find out, your white blood cells will get rid of the cells that were reprogrammed by the mRNA vaccine. Okay, that's fine. What if some of those cells are in my brain or my heart or in my veins? What's that going to happen? Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Why don't I have to worry about it? Okay, normal vaccines, I understand. I'm sort of going on a tangent here. Normal vaccines, I understand. Okay, you put the dead shell of a virus in your body, and your white blood cells feel it out, and they go, oh, it's shaped like this. They go back to white blood central, which is your lymph nodes, and they say anything that's shaped like this is bad. Make more of us that are programmed to know this. Okay, great. Your body's ready. Okay, that I understand. That doesn't scare me. I mean, every time I use the example when you're in the gardening and you're, trimming roses or something, you get a scratch. Well, there's little micro things in your blood, right? And what does your body do? It does two things. Number one, you can see your body, it inflames. Your blood cells form a clot around the cut to prevent stuff that might have come in through your skin to get into your blood. Okay, get it. And then your white blood cells, if anything got through before the red blood cells formed a clot, your white blood cells will find them, track it down, and dispose of it. And if it's inert, it's just basically garbage disposal. And if it's a virus or something, then they'll feel it out. 99.9% of the time, it's some virus that doesn't even affect people. It's just going to float around there. It may as well be just detritus. Anyway, I get that. But when you're programming my cells to produce something that's a toxin, a very small toxin substance, how does your body shut it down? And they're like, oh, well, your white blood cells will get rid of those cells. okay, what if that cell's in my brain? What if that cell's in my heart? What if it's something in my liver? Or, like what then? Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Why don't I have to worry about that? But then you'd get, if it somehow gets in your eardrum, maybe it'll hurt your earring. If it gets if it infects something in your eye, maybe it's going to hurt my eye. Maybe it's going to affect my thinking. Maybe it'll give me a bit of heart issue. And then you start reading, or you start meeting people. It's like, oh, my hearing went down, or I was achy, or getting heart. I was like, that is exactly when you think this through. It's your body, it's your white blood cells eliminating the cells that were reprogrammed by the mRNA vaccine. Anyway, that was a long tangent. I apologize, but it's just showing you have to think these things through. Building railways and pipelines is complicated, but it is not rocket science. If you're getting nonsense answers, you need to push back. In A2A rail, I knew things were really stinky. There's one experience where our lead consultant, I'm not going to mention them so I don't get sued, although I can prove it, what they did. Anyway, there's a bend in the Yukon River up in Carmacks, and they had this big meeting with a bunch of guys from their company at $200 an hour, $250 an hour US, plus the A2A team to talk about, should we go on this hill or this hill that's next to the Yukon River? Well, the side of the mountain that's next to the Yukon River is a 45-degree sand slope with a narrow band of trees, 20 feet wide at 45 degrees on the side. And we can put the railway through here. If you look at a picture of this slope, it's actively eroding. You know it's actively eroding because there's you can see it falling into the river. Like there's little cliffy things. And you're like, you don't build a train on a 45-degree sand slope over the Yukon River on an eroding slope that's being actively undermined as you're talking about it. Like that's a 2 seconds. So whenever I'm interviewing an engineer to work with me, that's the first thing I show a picture of. They slope. Could I put a track there? And they go, if they say, well, most of them pass. They look at the slope and they go, yeah, no, not a chance. You have to go on the other side of the mountain. It's not safe. I was like, yeah, obviously, right? But anyway, this is a very big, very well-respected company, and they charge somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 to A to say, no, we should go on the other side of that hill. Ethics reaches a limitation, and I'm hoping the heck I don't get sued now. But if I go to court, hey, I can prove it. I'll show you the picture, and I can get a dozen engineers to back me up. So don't try it. But the fact that sort of thing was surviving was telling me there's something very rotten at Alaska to Alberta Railway, and I can't say I was completely surprised when the company went under due to financial mismanagement in Toronto. Anyway,
I come back to you said something, and I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it, because I think probably a lot of Albertans want to help you get. And
sorry,
Shane,
I went on a tangent. Me and my tangents.
No, it's all right, because my brain is stuck on it, which is I listen to Shane and I hear it and I go, yeah, that's funny, and then I've given him a rough go for probably 2 years now because I want things yesterday, and I realize that's not the way our country operates. And then you come on and you share a vision that is similar to Shane's, and you have some of the knowledge that is just, as you're sitting here chatting, I'm sure some people are driving around going, holy man, this is okay. And then you say, we need Alberta's population. And I go, what can we do on this file, on this idea that would actually move our government when you just lay down on the shots and everything else? And I've been watching the population try and get that just removed completely. And they have been vocal, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it needs to be more vocal. But I'm like, when you say we need Albertans, what specifically?
I need the viewers to write to Shane at Lac-Saint-Anne, whatever, you can find us on his website. I need them to write and say, I support the vision of corridors for Alberta to the east, west, and north. And if something to that effect.
You were talking about the map. If somebody wants to won't sign their name to anything until they fully understand it, is there a way they can go see your work, interact with your work, see the idea in its full?
I haven't set up a website. No, I could show you the map here, but I don't have a website per se. I guess I could put it on an X account or something, or a LinkedIn account. But
can I put it on a?
Yeah,
I tell you
absolutely.
So what I could do is I can share the map, folks, when this releases. Sure. I'll put it on X underneath the. I'll just tag it on the post of the episode. as well too. That way you can actually just if you're interested. Otherwise, I'm glad I circled around on it because I'm like, what do you want? You want people to email Shane and be like, listen, the easiest way to help this guy do what he's trying to do is to understand the project, in my opinion. Understand like that makes sense. And then email Shane.
Email Shane, and Shane has said that's what I need. The other folks, I 100% believe that Danielle Smith supports this, but we have to understand what she's dealing with right now. She ran a restaurant out of a rail car, right? She gets trains. I spoke to her during the A2A days as a possible A2A agent. She was very favorable. She understands it completely, but we have to understand what she's up against. She's dealing with WEF. She's dealing with constant federal incursions. She was dealing with Guibo every 24 hours coming up with some insane statement after the next. She is sitting on one of the largest oil reserves on the planet. And audience, it's not just dudes. It's not just 5 million people. Like it's a province of 5 million people. It is one of the plums of the earth in terms of resources. We're up there with Saudi. We're up there with like Russian oil reserves. You know that the only bitumen deposit in the solar system, almost as big as our bitumen deposit, is on Pluto, of all places. Like it's crazy.
Really?
Yes.
Pluto?
Pluto. Yeah, there's a lot of bitumen on Pluto.
What?
Yeah.
What kind of random fact is that you're going to drop in this? And then
I'm just trying to say how big our deposit is.
He's trying to make a point, folks, and then he drops that on me, and I'm not supposed to bite? What? Pluto has oil.
Well, bitumen, yeah. Hydrocarbons are formed by formed by chemical reaction under certain geological processes. They're not fossil fuels. Only coal is a fossil fuel.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the right conditions exist of pressure and temperature and the right quantity ratio of quantities of different chemicals or elements in the right circumstances, they will form certain types of hydrocarbons. They're not fossil fuels. They're just it's a natural geological liquid. It's a mineral. We just happen to sit on the largest one in the solar system. The second largest one being in Pluto.
How the heck did they know that?
The New Horizons probe.
Really?
Yeah.
Curious. Your thoughts on Mars then? Are we going to have people colonize? I'm putting it in quotes. I don't know. Are we going to have people land there in the next, I don't know, in our lifetime?
Land, yes. I looking at the technologies we have access to, I think we can have people land there. When people talk about colonization, me being a regional planner who lived in the Arctic,
that's why I asked.
I go, there's a number of factors that kind of freaky that people don't realize. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, or if it does, it's extremely weak. If you do not have a magnetic field, that means every time the sun has a burp,
fries everything.
It fries everything, and it fries you. So that's a big issue. Mars, the Martian rotation is 24 hours and 56 minutes, so it's a good night-day cycle. Water resources are very limited to a number of places you can go. There's reason to believe that you could farm on Martian soil, so it is possible to have underground settlements, basically living under 3 or 4 meters of rock and coming out it would be admittedly a lightweight spacesuit because it's not a full vacuum, but the atmosphere is equivalent in density, I think, to Earth at 40 or 50,000 feet. So it's far below what a pressure, like you can't just wear a helmet on your head. Like your body the pressure would hurt you. The lack of pressure would hurt you. And another huge factor is dust, actually, believe it or not. The Martian dust is so arid, and it has a high clay content that it will be getting into everything. So every time you go outside, it's not just going through an airlock. It basically means having to do a full wash down.
I'm going to ask a really dumb question, but so be it. I'm sitting here and I go, I feel like I could throw at you the How was the fork developed? And you just start rattling off information.
I don't know.
Do you
Actually,
like,
I think it was Chinese.
in your job,
Uh-huh.
in your lifetime, do you just get on a plane or in a vehicle or whatever, and all you do is just consume information? You look at me and go, I don't know how you interview people all the time, and I look back at you and I go, I don't know how you continue to.
I'm just a geek, dude.
Yeah, but it's
Well,
funny.
it's related to planning. Listen, I'm a regional planner, and we're basically at school they were saying you will be a sustainability planner and fight against climate change, and then everything we're supposed to do is about climate change. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm supposed to plan for climate change, I need to understand climate change, right? So I started looking into it, what has occurred, what can happen, and different scenarios, and inevitably I got, think of it this way: if you're at a campfire, what determines whether you're too hot or too cold?
How much wood is on there or not on there, or where it's at in its stage of burning,
and how close you are to the fire.
Oh, and that too.
Yeah, and which way the wind is blowing. Okay, and what are you wearing? Right. So the climate change models that focus entirely on atmosphere are really just focusing on, are you wearing a light jacket or a parka when you're sitting around the fire? Because we're Earth, we're orbiting the sun. They're not paying attention to where's the heat coming from and which way is it blowing. Okay. So I'm like, okay, we need to understand the atmosphere stuff. And the problem with trying to do anything climate change is for every paper signed by a PhD, there's an equal and opposite paper saying the exact opposite freaking thing, but also signed by a PhD. The latest thing has been about the limitations of carbon dioxide to hold heat based on the amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere. And I kind of get that. If you have more carbon dioxide, you can hold more heat. Okay, fair enough. But what's the limitations on that? Because they always point at Venus. And I'm like, stop pointing at Venus, right? Venus has a surface temperature of like 800 degrees Celsius, an atmospheric pressure equivalent to something like 50 or 100 meters below the surface of the ocean. The planet has a rotation almost equal to its orbit. It's closer to the sun. Much of the atmosphere is sulfuric acids. The amount of volcanic activity on Venus is orders of magnitude more than in British Columbia than on the Earth. You can't compare it, right? And then Mars is an entirely carbon dioxide atmosphere, and it's cold, cold, cold. So you have to take each situation separately. But then I started looking into, well, okay, let's look at the campfire. How big is the campfire? Which way is it blowing, and what affects it? And you look at historical records, and you hear during the Roman Empire that they were able to grow grapes in the London area. You can't grow grapes in the London area now, so we're colder than in Rome. And you then hear about, the Dalton minimum and the Maunder minimum and, the climate effects of certain massive eruptions. But the thing with these massive eruptions, like Tambora or Krakatoa, or the more recent one, the one at Tuvalu or Tonga, the one in Tonga, like they only affect the weather for a year or two. Pinatubo, it affects the weather for a year or two, maybe 3 at most, but then all the soot is kind of an extra water moisture. Water moisture is a bigger insulator than carbon dioxide by a lot. And you know that every time there's a cloudy night and a winter day, if it's cloudy, it's
warmer.
It's warmer. It's like minus 20. And if it's clear, it's like minus 30. Yeah. That's because the clouds are holding in the heat. Anyway, volcanoes do affect the climate, but only for a year or two. And when you have a major eruption like Pinatubo or the Tonga Tapu eruption that was about 3 years ago, it kind of skews your data for like 2-3 years afterwards, because it completely changes the mix of the atmosphere.
Well, I think the largest volcanic eruption on the planet ever, that's recordable history, I should add, increased the temperature of the planet by 3 degrees for 3 years, something like that.
Sounds about right. That's probably Tambora.
And you read that and you're like, so we're worried about 1.5 degrees, yet it's already been historically proven. Anyways, I get into this thing of like, we have no control. Anyway, yeah.
Anyway, what I discovered is something I sort of suspected a little bit, because I remember 10 years ago I wrote to my uncle, who's a nuclear physicist, and I said, the main solar cycle is 12 years. Almost everybody's heard about that solar cycle lasts about 12 years, right? And I said, the orbit of Jupiter is like almost just about 12 years. There's almost no chance. There's no chance coincidences in nature. If Jupiter is at 12 years and the sun's at 12 years, is there a relationship? And he basically said he didn't know, but in a very long-winded way that didn't make a lot of sense. But I just kept on that, and then I stumbled across the work by Dr. Zharkova out of the University of Northumbria in England, and a few others. She's Ukrainian. On solar planetary orbital geometrics, and I don't understand everything she said, but I'll do a really quick summary if I can. So the solar system is 8 planets. There's 4 inner planets that are rocky and small. Then there's the asteroid belt, and then there's 4 outer planets that are big and gaseous. The outer planets are are much bigger than the inner rocky planet core, but 90-something% of the planetary mass of the solar system is in Jupiter. And people say, what about Pluto? Okay, there's 4 dwarf planets that are way out there. And they had to reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet because they found Eris, which is bigger than Pluto. And they said, do we call it a 10th planet, or do we, because it's barely big, it's smaller than it's basically the size of our moon. And they said, let's just call it dwarf planets, because otherwise, and then they kept on they kept on finding dwarf planets. Now there's like 4 or 5 of them that are discovered. One has a really horrible name, like Weyrash or something, and then there's Eris and Sedna and something else. Anyway, they're way out there, and then the way they behave in terms of their orbits indicates there's high probability there is a planet 9, which is way out there, but has not yet been discovered. Anyway, key thing, Jupiter is 90-something% of the mass of the planetary mass in the solar system. Jupiter is so big that the sun moves like this. So if you put a point just off the surface of the sun is basically every 12 years moving around that. Okay, from the orbit of from the gravitational attraction of Jupiter. What Zharkova basically said is, yes, there is a relationship between the orbit of Jupiter causing this movement of the sun, which is basically a tidal force. Like, think of the tides of the oceans was created by the moon. It's very little pressure. Take a bowl of water, and you know how you can hold a bowl of water and just move it really lightly, and then each time you do it, it gets a little bit waver, and after a few turns, it's spilling off the side. It's the same thing. It's the same effect. The sun is fluid. The sun is made of plasma, which is basically hydrogen and helium stripped of its outer electrons. So it's ionized, it's electrified, it's magnetized hydrogen at a very high temperature. So it acts sort of like a fluid, but a highly magnetic fluid, which, because it's a fluid, it's not a solid, it's more subject to these tidal forces. And there's a relationship between Jupiter's orbit and the 12-year cycle on the sun. Here's where it gets really funky, and when you look into it, you actually kind of start destroying the whole theory about life on other planets, because you start realizing what actually the infrastructure is to allow for life on Earth. And I'm not sure if you wanted me to go all the way down to Io, but if you take the orbit of Jupiter, in most solar systems where you have a Jupiter, tidal forces on the main planet will gradually cause its orbit to shrink, and it will tend to eat the smaller planets that are closer to their star. They've discovered like 5,000 exoplanets now with their amazing with their outer space telescopes and their amazing technologies. And they said, well, why hasn't this happened? The answer is Saturn. Saturn keeps Jupiter where it is, and Jupiter is also an extremely circular orbit. It's not eccentric. It's almost a perfect circle. That is because of Saturn acts as a tidal force on Jupiter. And if you draw the orbit of Jupiter as a circle, and you draw an equilateral triangle around that circle, the next circle that touches the 3 points of that triangle is the orbit of Saturn. It's that well tuned. This was figured out by Kepler in the 15 or 1600s. And that's why he came up with the music of the sphere, where he started applying musical notes to the harmonies that he was seeing in the solar system. And that cycle repeats, where the orbit of Saturn is stabilized by the orbit of Neptune, and then, Uranus, and the orbit of Uranus is stabilized by the orbit of Neptune. And looking at everything, they're expecting there's another ninth planet way out there, which acts as the ultimate stabilizer that stabilizes the orbit of Neptune. When those 4 planets move, they change the tidal forces on the sun. Now this is where the physics and I'm not good at like higher level calculus, so I don't know. But you just try to visualize it, is that you have this magnetized fluid of the sun with this light pressure going around it, right? And it's 4 times 4. Sometimes they're in a line, sometimes they're on opposite sides. What does that do? And what creates magnetism or electricity? You create electricity by having a solenoid, right, of a material that can carry electrical current and then spinning. The same thing kind of exists in Earth with iron. We have iron toruses in our core from our rotation and from the tidal forces of the moon that creates toruses of semi-liquid iron inside our core that creates our magnetic field, which protects us from the solar wind and solar storms most of the time, except for the really big ones, which happen every few hundred years. Which is another thing I'm pushing, is that every time we build new electrical infrastructure, we really should have it prepared against one of these massive solar storms, because they don't come very often, but when they can come, they basically they will fry our power grid if it's not attracted for that. Anyway, because the sun is so big, there's not just one torus in the middle. There's different toruses inside it. And at any given time, there can be anywhere from 5 to 30 north magnetic poles and south magnetic poles on the sun. And I may be completely wrong in this, but my understanding at the present time, and if you want to look it up, go to Dr. Sharkova or look up, it's become quite a hot topic of research over the last 4 or 5 years, because they have the solar readings that they can actually putting in hypothesis and actually test it out scientifically. My understanding is that if the tidal forces caused by the 4 outer planets are such that the magnetic fields kind of align more, you get a stronger overall magnetic field from the sun. And if they are more far apart, you get overall weaker magnetic field, because the different toruses are acting in unison or not. And the toruses may merge or separate. The sun, as I said, is extremely fluid. And every so often it blows off a piece of its upper atmosphere, and it comes like a crazy death stream coming out. And if it happens to hit the Earth, that's where you get aurora or you get a Carrington event. Anyway, if the sun is, and they also affect the solar output. If the sun is 0.25% warmer than 100 years ago, it'll be warmer here by a few degrees. If the sun is a little bit cooler, it'll be cooler here. The key point I got from Dr. Sharkova's papers and those of some of her colleagues that I looked up was that they understand these tidal forces on the sun well enough that they can back forecast. So they can say, based on the planetary alignments 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years ago, we can say that there's different cycles on the sun. There's the 12-year cycle I mentioned. There's a 20-year cycle. There's a 350-year cycle. And there's a 1,000-year cycle. There's and there may be a 10,000-year cycle. They're not sure about it yet. That has to do with orbital perturbations, because remember, these orbits are not completely static. They're never the same exactly twice. The Earth, it never is not. The Earth, in a lifetime, we don't notice the difference. But for example, if you look at your astrological sign, it's the wrong astrological sign, because it's based on the old Greek system, the Greek dates from 2,500 years ago. There's a progression of the constellations. So you're in the one next over to it now. So I mean, by the Greek system, I am a Taurus, but actually, the day I was born, the sun was in Aries, because of the progression of the constellations. And that's because the Earth's orbit changes by a predictable way very, very slowly. But anyway, the same thing with the planets. They back forecast, and they were able to forecast, because you can be going up on one cycle and down while you're going down. You can be going down this way, but on a small cycle you're going up. You know what I mean? And they're able to back forecast at 2,000 years. And they're able to say, yep, it matches the model. And they were saying, okay, they weren't completely consistent in their forecasting, but basically it said sometime around 2021, 2022, we're going to start seeing winters getting longer and colder. And that's going to last for about 30, 40 years. And it's going to start getting warm again. That's what Dr. Scholz says. Another scientist I read disagreed by those dates by a little bit. So I wrote a letter or an article for my professional magazine, and I said, we should be aware of this. Everything's talking about global warming. The climate is warming up right now, but according to them, the sun is going to cool down slightly for 30 years. So we should be ready for getting cooler. And they were like, their reaction was hilarious. They were like, what planet did you come from, strange person? I'm like, you're focusing on the coat that the camper is wearing around the campfire. I'm looking at the campfire itself. And the people that understand the campfire are saying the sun's going to cool down for a few decades and we should probably be ready for colder winters. And when I see minus 38 in Saskatchewan last week.
Well, the coldest place on the planet for a day was Watchers.
Fair enough. But I look at those and I'm going, this is going to slowly destroy the climate change narrative completely, because people are going to be saying they're still pushing climate change as climate warming. And they're going to say, well, it's getting colder because of climate change.
But they've been pushing.
And I'm going, the overall system is cooling down.
They've been pushing a different variation of that for a long time.
Yeah. So they're aware of this and they're trying to keep it going.
One final topic before I let you out of here, because we've done a full gamut today. You mentioned you worked in the Arctic.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion around the Arctic. Whether it's corridors, whether it's icebreakers and the next sea lanes, and or whether it's military and there's this big well-kept secret up in the Arctic, blah 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 blah.
There isn't, but okay.
Your thoughts on the Arctic?
I think people are overly optimistic about some aspects of the Arctic, and they're a little bit naive about its development. I lived in a house. I've lived in Iqaluit, Arviat, Cambridge Bay, and Kugluktuk over a 10-year period in 2 separate stints. I'm very familiar with the Arctic, and I'm very familiar with 6 foot thick ice in June. I know because I go fishing, and they have these crazy long augers that are 6-7 feet long, and they need the full thing to get down. I'm like, I can't imagine running a boat through this and it not costing a lot, because this is really strong ice. The changes that have occurred in the Arctic, the Eastern Arctic has tended to get a bit cooler. The Western Arctic has been tending to get warmer. You've seen grizzly bears moving into the Western Arctic.
And by Western Arctic, where do you exactly mean?
Sort of Yukon, Northwest Territory coast. The Eastern Arctic, mainly Nunavut, you've actually seen polar bear populations increase because it's a little bit warmer, and now that increased marine bioproduction, which basically means that there's more fish, which means there's more seals, which means there's more polar bears. And people, if you go to Arviat, and they got sick of the whole climate change thing. It's like, oh, the poor Inuit, they don't get any food, and they're like, we got too many polar bears. We've never had this many polar bears. I couldn't leave my family couldn't leave my house for 3 days because we had a polar bear parked outside for 3 freaking days because of whatever reason. So when we talk about shipping and icebreakers, I want to temper that with, number one, the ice is going to be a lot tougher than you think it is. And number two, the Arctic works as a dual ecosystem in that there's a water season and a season when the ice is basically part of the land. Caribou herds will migrate across the ice in certain seasons. If you break the ice while they're migrating, the caribou will not stop. They will go into the water. Their hooves and antlers do not allow them to get up the other side. They will freeze to death. There have been, in northern Quebec, for example, one of their herds was basically wiped out in one fell swoop because one of the dams was releasing water during a migration. And the caribou don't care. They need to get from point A to point B, and that's all they're programmed to do. It doesn't matter if it's a raging torrent. They're still going into that raging torrent. They all drown, like 500,000 of them.
When was that?
It's like 10, 15 years ago. The Quebecers learned their lesson about watching where the caribou are before they opening their dam. The caribou are not smart animals. They're basically automatons.
Feels like half of Canadians right now. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah, they're not Sven. Anyway, the seals will pup.
Can't get a hockey analogy, but Peter can drop down Frozen.
Well, I've got 4 girls.
Yes, fair enough.
The seals will pup inside the ice, usually in March. And getting back to our boat analogy, the pressure wave from the boat. If an icebreaker is going through the ice, it's going to be releasing a pressure wave that isn't able to go up and down because it's under ice. When it comes to a seal hole, what's it going to do? It's going to flood the cave. And if the seal is still a pup and it gets wet, there's a good chance it will not survive. It'll freeze to death. There's a reason they don't go into the water the moment they're born. They have to go through their cute white fluffy phase before they develop their marine hair. So if you move, when I worked at the Nunavut Planning Commission, we were getting information to the effect that if you ran a icebreaker through the Lancaster Sound between March and April just once, that would kill off like 20% of the Arctic seal population, one passage of one ship, because it's just going to wipe out it's going to freeze the pups to death. Same with polar bears. They don't eat for 8 months a year. They hunt seals, and they need certain ice conditions to hunt. And if you crack the ice, usually they hunt by waiting for the seals to come up to a breathing hole, and then they will grab it, rip it out of the ice, and then eat it. But if the
you create giant breathing holes, then
if you create a whole passage, then the seals are like, well, screw you, I'm just going to go out where you can't get me.
Safe.
Right.
You're changing the ecosystem.
So you have to really temper your expectations. Like there's been a lot of talk about getting to Churchill or Port Nelson. The
best way to do this is to build railways on the northern side of BC into Alaska, and forgive me, you had one other one that I'm actually northern BC to where?
Northern BC to Hudson Bay. I believe there is a way to link up some Polinias and some high water sections in northern Hudson Bay to swing around the ice, to swing around the constant ice pack. But you really need to be careful. The Arctic is such that you can cause a lot of ecological devastation really quickly. And anyway, so that's where that is. I
appreciate making the time to go out here. We've been going over 2 hours.
We still haven't talked about. I still want to go after Nenshi.
Oh well, I tell you what. Well, that's not the NDP is not a serious party, folks, on this show. But certainly Nenshi. Yeah, we'll give you a couple. I mean, I don't mean to rush you out of here. I just go like we've been. It's funny. Me and one of the lovely things about having a guest come here, and like you get to spend. We're 3 hours last night. There's a couple hours this morning. Now we're up over a couple hours right now, not to mention the starting of this. I'm getting a crash course in Peter's world. And I'm still sitting here at times going, who the heck are you? Right? Anyways.
Well, yeah.
Nenshi.
I didn't quite answer your question before. I'll answer it very, very quickly. You said, why is the government of Alberta not pursuing corridors? And I believe there's hesitation because of past scandals. And I'm saying we have the team that is passionate to get this thing done and have proven to get things done. And we need the listeners to write to Shane and says, the people of Alberta support the development of corridors. And please do write that.
I'll throw out a different idea. Would having Shane back on here with you, would that be at all beneficial?
I wouldn't mind. See if Shane.
Oh, well, I don't think Shane's going to turn down.
Shane is so much more charismatic than I am. I would just sit in a corner.
Yeah, but you're not a politician, and I'm sorry, Shane. That's the truth of the matter. So it'd be interesting if we were to talk about infrastructure and what it could do for Alberta, where it needs to go. The thing, because I'm annoyed by this entire. I personally am annoyed because it's been on here. How many times, folks, have we talked about this? A lot, and. Emailing a politician just doesn't seem like it's worked a whole lot in the last little bit. Now, in saying that, that is my own bias on it. And, I'm very free to explore the conversation of I don't know, strengthening Alberta and building out things and building things, and it not taking 20 years to do such a thing.
Yep.
So to me, I'm sure Shane would be interested in that conversation. Okay, fair enough.
Cool.
Nenshi.
I'll be real quick about it. Back in 2012, I volunteered, and I haven't asked for his permission to name him, but he's a public figure. He's a politician, G.C. Kura, who our friendship ended during COVID for reasons you can probably imagine.
Surmise, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, I stayed in his basement. Great guy. I ate a lot of Italian food. Read his zombie comics. And that's still, I still look back and I go like, this is the real loss from COVID, is these kinds of relationships where a left winger and a right winger were sitting talking about municipal taxation, because we were looking at him and I were doing a research project with someone I greatly respect, who prefers to remain anonymous, but who is closely tied to Nenshi. And we were putting a lot of volunteer hours into looking at how to make Calgary more financially sustainable over the long run by amending taxation. And there's a lot of weaknesses in municipal taxation. In property tax is basically a form of income tax, and it allows for a growth of bureaucracy that does not incentivize to create efficiency. It'd work a lot better, for example, if a municipality paid for its roads by charging a gas tax for pumps within the city or something like that, because then it's like you tie the tax to what you're doing. In this case, maintaining roads. And I really noticed an issue when I first bought my house in Edmonton after I left the Arctic, and it was like, what do you mean my tax bill is $7,000? I'm like, you're not even paying for my water. You don't even plow my streets. How is it me living in this house is costing the city $7,000? Yeah, I see there's some main lines, there's some LRTs around, but how is this working? There's obviously an awful lot of bloat, which I wasn't aware of at the time, but sure I'm aware of now. Municipalities need to go through a doge as well, but basically property taxes unfortunately encourage sprawl. They encourage too much infrastructure per capita. And we were looking at different tax arrangements from all over the world. We looked at like 50 different ways of municipalities to raise revenue through either taxation or user fees, and mixing and matching and trying to find a better solution for Calgary. All very nerdy stuff. We came up with some promising leads. And as I said, again, this was pro bono. Here's the kicker. Nenshi was mayor. Nenshi was the new mayor. Nenshi was 100% aware of what we were doing. Nenshi was 100% not interested in what we were doing. He didn't care. On one hand, he's pounding his fist on the table going like, we need sustainable city, it's a climate issues, blah, blah, blah. And the other hand, we're coming in with him and saying, if we alter the tax structure even just a little bit in a way that is consistent with the Municipal Governance Act, we can shift the city. I mean, urban growth in a city the size of Calgary, if you shift it 0.01%, right, just by a tweak in certain areas of the taxation system. And this wasn't even theoretical. These taxation solutions had been used in other places like Pittsburgh or Singapore, and it worked spectacularly well. Just shifting 0.01% for something so huge, it changes the mass. And the idea was reducing the infrastructure maintenance burden per taxpayer, and increasing the financial resilience of the city, which I've since realized has to be combined with Doge to cut out inefficiency. But that's the key thing. Nenshi was in the position to make it happen, and he was promising his electorate he would make it happen. He didn't. He didn't care. He wasn't interested in solutions. We gave him a practical solution. He had zero interest. I want Albertans to tell everybody, like, as boring as something as property taxes, I can share your paper. I can share the paper if people are interested, but it is really dry, as you might expect. It's all about taxes. But he didn't care. And if he ever becomes premier by some miracle, we're up shit creek with that character, because he's not interested in solutions. He's interested in saying, I'm the politician to save you and fix things. He will not fix them. He will make them worse deliberately so that he can reinforce his vote. And yeah, I'd feel better sharing for that, because I really felt betrayed by him. And it's really hardened my attitude towards the left, because back then I was willing to work with the left, because I'm like, oh, we're all trying for the same thing. We're trying to make a better society. We just have different perspectives. And I'm like, no, you guys don't care. You're trying to create a tyranny. And Nenshi, you're part of that, and I'm talking to you directly, Nenshi, if you hear my words. I am angry at you for ignoring all that work and those of your peers. You knew better, and you didn't care, and you do not deserve to be premier. I'm saying that from a very personal, visceral place. I'll stop there, which isn't really that positive. Should we tell that as a joke or something?
How about you do your Chrétien impersonation?
Oh, no, I can't do that in public. Well, all right. I did say bring it up. Jeez, okay.
You can do whatever. You had a great one this morning, honestly.
Okay. All right. Context is I'm imitating Chrétien when he came to Iqaluit in 2001, and he gave a speech inaugurating one of the new national parks in Nunavut. And he said something like this. And if he hears this, I hope he gets a laugh. Gotta talk from the side now. Back in 1970, when I was Minister of the North, I flew over the Baffin Island, and I looked down, and I saw down there very beautiful mountains, and I said, this would be a good place for a national park. So when I returned to Ottawa, I went to the Minister of Parks, who was myself, and I said to him, this should be a national park, and he agreed. So then I went to the Minister of Northern Affairs, who was myself, and he said, yes, it should also be a national park. And then I went to the Minister of Arctic Affairs, or whatever it was, and who was myself. And we all three of us agreed this should be a national park. And so we drew the boundaries. We went to the Prime Minister, Trudeau, and we said this should be a national park. And he said, okay, he signed a piece of paper, and 1 week later it was a national park. Nowadays, not so easy to set up a national park, and I applaud that we have a new one. I didn't do that as good as I usually have a better Quebec accent, but I love the way it's like, who was myself?
Ridiculous.
Peter, anyway, thank you very much.
Peter, thanks for making the trip. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And, I'd be interested to see what people say about today's chat. Either way, the corridor conversation continues on this side, and we'll see. Because once again, I hope Shane listens. I think Shane will listen. Shane listens here and there, or sporadically. I would say. I don't know, Shane. You'd have to tell me. But regardless, this one specifically, when it comes to corridors and everything else, I know that's a big thing on his plate that he wants to get Alberta doing. And so maybe there's another conversation that can be had around that. Either way, Peter, thanks for hopping in here and doing this.